What if I told you that the very first civilization in human history possessed technologies so advanced, so utterly baffling, that even our modern scientists still struggle to fully understand them? Picture the vast, sun-scorched plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where crumbling ziggurats and weathered clay tablets whisper secrets of a people who laid the foundation for everything we know today. These were the Sumerians, the world's first civilization, emerging from the mists of time over 6,000 years ago with knowledge that seems to defy explanation. We often imagine ancient societies as primitive, struggling with basic survival, but the Sumerians challenge every assumption we hold about humanity's early journey. They didn't just invent writing or build cities, they mastered arts and sciences with a sophistication that feels almost out of place in the ancient world. From metallurgical techniques that produced alloys we can barely replicate today, to architectural feats that align perfectly with celestial events, their accomplishments read like something from a science fiction novel. And perhaps most intriguing of all, some of their knowledge seems to hint at influences or insights that go far beyond what we'd expect from a civilization of that era. In this video, we're going to explore 30 of their most enigmatic technologies, each one more astonishing than the last. We'll uncover how they achieved what should have been impossible for their time, and ask the questions that have puzzled historians for generations. Was their knowledge entirely their own? Could they have had help from sources we're only beginning to understand? Or did they possess a lost understanding of the universe that we have yet to rediscover? Join me on this journey back through time, as we piece together the fragments of a story that challenges everything we thought we knew about human innovation, and invites us to see our own technological age in a startling new light. Our journey into the unknown begins not with a grand machine or a towering monument, but with something far more humble, a damp clay tablet and a sharp reed stylus. Around 3,200 years before the Common Era, in the bustling city of Uruk, the Sumerians faced a problem that seems almost quaint to us today. They had too much stuff to keep track of. Their granaries were overflowing with barley, their temples held vast treasures, and their herds of livestock were constantly growing. How could they possibly remember it all? Their ingenious solution would become humanity's very first system of true writing, cuneiform. The word cuneiform itself comes from the Latin for wedge-shaped, and that's exactly what these marks look like, tiny impressions made by pressing the angled corner of a cut reed into soft clay. It started simply with pictographs that were straightforward drawings of an object, like a head of grain or a cow. But over centuries, this system evolved into something breathtakingly complex and abstract. These symbols shifted from representing tangible things to representing sounds and concepts, allowing scribes to capture not just lists of commodities, but the full depth of human thought, from a king's decree to a farmer's prayer. The true magic of cuneiform lies in its durability. Unlike ink on papyrus or parchment, these baked clay tablets could survive fire, water, and the relentless passage of time. They became indestructible time capsules, preserving the Sumerian voice across millennia. For the longest time, their secrets were locked away, a language completely lost to history. It wasn't until the 19th century that brilliant scholars like Henry Rawlinson, using a monumental trilingual inscription in Persia, painstakingly cracked the code. Suddenly, an entire civilization, silent for over 2,000 years, could speak to us directly, and what a story they had to tell. These tablets weren't just dry administrative records. They contained the epic of Gilgamesh, a stunningly profound tale of friendship, the quest for immortality, and a great flood that eerily parallels later biblical accounts. They held detailed legal codes that established laws and courts, laying the foundation for justice. But perhaps most astonishing are the mathematical tablets. The Sumerians didn't use a base 10 system like we do. They used a base 60 system, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Their tablets show complex calculations for everything from land division and compound interest to advanced astronomy, tracking the movements of planets with a precision that seems to defy their era. This wasn't just record-keeping, it was the very birth of literature, science, and history itself, all etched into clay for the future to discover. Yet this revolutionary invention did not stop at the potter's workshop. It was only a matter of time before a Sumerian thinker, perhaps observing a potter effortlessly spinning a heavy lump of clay, had a flash of pure genius. What if that same rotating principle could be applied to moving heavy objects across the ground? The leap from a rotating disc to a load-bearing axle was one of the most profound moments in human history. The earliest wheels were simple, solid affairs, 3 planks of wood, shaped into a disc and held together with cross braces, then fixed to a rotating axle. It was clunky, it was heavy, but it was nothing short of a miracle. This new technology immediately sparked a transportation revolution. The ancient equivalent of a logistics boom began almost overnight. The Sumerians created massive 4-wheeled wagons drawn by teams of oxen. These were not the sleek vehicles of our imagination. They were cumbersome and slow, but they could carry loads unimaginable to a single porter or a pack animal. Suddenly, the immense agricultural surplus from the fertile fields could be transported to distant cities and stored in central granaries. Trade goods, wood, stone, metals, and precious gems could now move in bulk across vast distances, weaving a complex web of commerce that connected and enriched all of Sumer. This simple wooden disc was the engine of the world's first economy. But where technology offers prosperity, it also inevitably invites power. The Sumerians, living in a landscape of competing city-states like Ur and Lagash, were quick to see the wheel's devastating potential in conflict. The solid wheel evolved into something far more agile and terrifying, the spoked wheel. By carving a wheel from a single piece of wood or crafting it from a bent rim with spokes radiating from a central hub, they created a structure that was dramatically lighter and stronger. This innovation allowed for the development of the war chariot, a lightweight, 2-wheeled platform pulled by powerful onagers, a type of wild ass. For the first time in human history, warfare saw the introduction of a mobile weapons platform. A driver would control the team while a warrior, armed with a javelin or axe, could unleash havoc on enemy formations. The psychological impact alone must have been horrifying. The sight and sound of a charging chariot unit would have been as terrifying to an infantryman of that time as a tank is to a soldier today. This military advantage catapulted the Sumerian city-states into the role of the world's first superpowers. Control of this technology meant control of the battlefield, and by extension, control of the region's resources and trade routes. The chariot became a symbol of divine kingship and unstoppable force, depicted endlessly on victory monuments and royal standards. The wheel, born from the humble need to shape a clay pot, had become the cornerstone of economic might and military dominance, setting a precedent that would echo through every empire that followed, from the Egyptians to the Romans. It was more than a tool. It was the very catalyst that shifted the balance of human civilization from a scattered collection of settlements towards interconnected, powerful, and ambitious empires. While the wheel reshaped the landscape of trade and power, another revolution was brewing in the fiery hearts of Sumerian workshops, one that would literally reshape the material world. This brings us to their third enigmatic technology, a mastery over metal that feels almost alchemical. The Sumerians didn't just use metal, they fundamentally transformed it, creating an entirely new material that would define an age. Around 3,000 years before the Common Era, in a stunning leap of innovation, they pioneered the creation of bronze. This was not a simple discovery, it was an act of high science. Bronze is not a pure metal you dig out of the ground. It is an alloy, a deliberate and precise mixture of two softer metals, copper and tin. the genius of the Sumerian metallurgists lay in their understanding of proportions. They discovered that by adding roughly 10% tin to 90% copper and subjecting it to immense heat, they created a substance that was harder, stronger, and could hold a far sharper edge than any material previously known. This was the birth of the Bronze Age, and it started with them. To achieve this, they needed to command temperatures that were, for the time, almost unimaginable. Their tool for this was the reverberatory furnace, a sophisticated design often lined with heat-resistant clay and fueled by charcoal. But the real key was their invention of the tire and the bellows. A tire was a ceramic pipe inserted directly into the furnace chamber, and attached to it were leather bellows operated by hand or foot. This wasn't just blowing on a fire, it was a deliberate engineering solution to force a continuous stream of oxygen into the coals, supercharging the combustion process. With this technology, Sumerian smiths could consistently achieve and maintain temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius, a level of heat necessary to not only melt copper and tin, but to fuse them perfectly into a homogeneous liquid alloy that could be poured into mold. The artifacts they left behind are a silent testament to a skill level that seems to defy their era. Take, for instance, the Royal Standard of Ur, an incredible mosaic inlaid box discovered in the Royal Cemetery. While the standard itself is famous for its detailed scenes of war and peace, the true metallurgical magic is in its construction. The panel is not just wood and stone. It features breathtakingly delicate inlay work using gold and silver. Using tools we can only guess at, likely fine chisels and drills tipped with harder stones like chert, they carved intricate channels into the lapis lazuli background and then meticulously hammered and set microscopic sheets and wires of precious metal into them. The precision of this work, achieved without modern magnifying lenses or precision tools, is utterly baffling. It speaks to a guild of artisans who possessed not just technical skill, but an almost supernatural patience and a deep, intimate understanding of the behavior of different metals under the hammer. This advanced metallurgy became the bedrock of their entire society. The superior strength of bronze gave them weapons that could dominate the battlefield's stronger spearheads, deadly axes, and durable armor. It provided farmers with more effective plowshares that could tear through the tough Mesopotamian soil, drastically increasing agricultural yield, and on a grander scale, it allowed for the creation of vast monumental architecture. Bronze saws and chisels enabled the quarrying and shaping of massive stone blocks for their temples and ziggurats. Their ability to manipulate metal was so advanced that it raises a profound question. Were they merely lucky innovators, or did they possess a systematic, scientific understanding of material science that was somehow lost for centuries after their decline? The evidence baked into their artifacts suggests the latter, pointing to a civilization that saw the world not as a collection of elements, but as a palette of possibilities waiting to be mixed and mastered. Yet this mastery over land and metal was only one facet of their genius, for the Sumerians also looked to the waters and saw not a barrier but a highway. In a land defined by its two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, they conceived of a technology that would harness the very wind itself. Around 3,500 years before the Common Era, a Sumerian boat builder made a staggering leap in logic. If a man could use a stick to push a boat forward, what if a force of nature could do the pushing instead? This simple yet monumental thought led to the invention of the sail, an innovation that would transform humanity's relationship with the water forever. Their first sailing vessels were a testament to practical ingenuity, crafted from materials readily available in the marshy southern Mesopotamian landscape. The hulls were built of wood when possible, but more often they were expertly constructed from bundles of reeds, tightly bound together and coated with bitumen, a natural tar that seeped up from the ground to make them watertight. The sail itself was a large, square sheet of woven reed matting or later, linen, hung from a sturdy wooden mast set amidships. It was a simple rig, but it was profoundly effective. A sailor could now raise this sail and, by angling it to catch the prevailing wind, propel his heavily laden craft upstream against the current of the Euphrates with a fraction of the effort required by a team of oarsmen. This was the first time in human history that a vehicle was moved not by muscle, but by an invisible, natural force. This new capability did far more than just ease the strain on a boatman's back. It ignited an economic explosion. The rivers became pulsating arteries of commerce, carrying grain, wool, dried fish, and pottery from agrarian city-states in the north to the bustling ports in the south. But the Sumerians' ambition stretched far beyond their own riverbanks. They looked south to the Persian Gulf and saw a blue road to unimaginable wealth. With their stout sailing boats, they began to venture into these open waters, establishing the world's first long-distance maritime trade routes. Archaeological evidence, particularly from the ancient port city of Ur, reveals a treasure trove of goods that could only have come from distant shores. Exquisite carnelian beads from the Indus Valley, sleek black obsidian from Anatolia, and rare, fragrant woods from the coasts of Oman and Dilmun, modern-day Bahrain. Undertaking these voyages required a sophisticated and hard-won understanding of the sea. These were not blind trips into the unknown. They were carefully planned commercial ventures based on a deep, empirical knowledge of the environment. Sumerian sailors became masterful readers of wind patterns, learning to anticipate the seasonal shifts that would fill their sails and carry them to their destinations. They studied the complex currents of the Gulf, understanding how these aquatic rivers within the sea could either aid their journey or dash their vessels against hidden rocks. For navigation, they relied on a primitive but effective form of celestial piloting, using the sun by day and the consistent positions of certain stars by night to maintain a general course. They also possessed an intimate knowledge of the coastline, using landmarks to triangulate their position long before the invention of the compass or the sextant. This maritime network did more than just import luxury goods. It fundamentally reshaped Sumerian culture, economy, and even mythology. The constant influx of new ideas, materials, and people from far-off lands infused their society with a cosmopolitan energy, fostering innovation in art, architecture, and thought. The sea and its perils became a powerful motif in their literature, most famously in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero must cross the waters of death to find the secret of eternal life. The sail, a simple sheet of woven reeds, had thus accomplished the impossible. It shrank the ancient world, connecting disparate cultures for the first time and setting the stage for every great seafaring empire that would follow, from the Phoenicians to the Greeks. It was a technology born of observation and courage, proving that the Sumerians were not just masters of their land, but pioneers of the vast, uncharted sea. While the sail conquered the rivers and the sea, the true foundation of Sumerian power was being carved from the earth itself, one furrow at a time. The invention that made their civilization possible wasn't found in a king's treasury or a temple's inner sanctum, but in the hands of a farmer guiding a team of oxen. This was the plow, and its development around 3,000 years before the Common Era was nothing less than a second agricultural revolution, one that permanently altered the relationship between humanity and the land. Before this pivotal innovation, farming was a brutally laborious process. Farmers used simple, handheld digging sticks or hoes to painfully break up the sun-baked Mesopotamian soil, a method that could only support small, subsistence-level plots. The Sumerian plow, known as the Ard, changed everything. Its design was a masterpiece of practical engineering. The main component was a strong, curved piece of wood called the draft pole, which acted as both a handle for the farmer and the attachment point for the oxen team. At its base was the share, the part that actually cut into the earth. Initially, this was just a hardened, fire-sharpened point of wood. But in a stunning example of technological cross-pollination, Sumerian craftsmen soon fitted these shares with tips made of that miraculous new material, bronze. This copper-tipped share could slice through the tough, root-filled soil with an efficiency that pure wood or stone could never match. The real power, however, came not from the tool itself, but from what was put in front of it. The Sumerians were among the very first peoples to successfully domesticate oxen and, crucially, devise a method to harness their immense strength. They developed a sturdy yoke that rested across the animal's shoulders, connecting them to the draft pole. For the first time in history, the muscle power of animals was systematically and effectively redirected to the task of food production. A single farmer with a team of oxen could now prepare a field in a fraction of the time it would take a dozen men with hoes, and he could work a much larger area. This single innovation exponentially increased the amount of land that could be brought under cultivation. The consequences of this were civilization-altering. With the ard plow, Sumerian farmers could produce a staggering food surplus. Their fields overflowed with barley, emmer wheat, onions, and dates. This surplus is the absolute prerequisite for everything we associate with civilization. It meant that not everyone had to farm. This food surplus allowed for the emergence of a new class of specialists: full-time priests, administrators, soldiers, artists, and metalworkers. These were the people who built the ziggurats, developed cuneiform, forged bronze weapons, and composed epic poetry. The plow directly fed the growth of dense urban populations as people moved from scattered villages into the protective walls of cities like Uruk and drawn by the promise of security and economic opportunity. It was the plow that made the city-state and all its complex glory physically possible. This profound connection between the plow and the birth of society was not lost on the Sumerians themselves. They held the plow in such high esteem that it was deeply woven into their religious and cultural fabric. In their mythology, the act of plowing was a sacred duty, a divine imitation of the creator god who first brought order out of the watery chaos. Kings were depicted in art and ceremony not only as warriors but as faithful farmers, personally guiding the plow in ritual ceremonies to ensure the land's fertility and to demonstrate their role as the nation's ultimate provider. The plow was more than a farm tool. It was a symbol of creation, order, and the very engine of their world, proving that the most transformative technologies are often those that work in silence, turning the soil that feeds an empire. But mastering the land and the water required more than just a plow. It demanded an even greater feat of engineering to tame the very rivers that gave them life. The Tigris and Euphrates were not gentle benefactors. They were unpredictable and often violent forces of nature. Their annual floods didn't arrive with the gentle, predictable regularity of the Niles. They could come suddenly in the spring, washing away entire fields and settlements, or fail entirely, bringing devastating drought. To survive and ultimately thrive in this landscape, the Sumerians had to become the world's first hydraulic engineers, devising a system of water management of breathtaking complexity and scale. Their solution was a vast, artificial web of canals, dikes, and reservoirs that literally reshaped their world. This was no simple ditches dug by farmers. This was large-scale, state-organized civil engineering. The process began at the river itself, where massive diversion dams or barrages, constructed from woven reeds, rubble, and earth, were built to force a portion of the water out of the main channel and into a primary canal. These main canals were monumental undertakings, some excavated to be over 50 feet wide and deep enough for small boats, stretching for miles across the flat plain. The genius of their design lay in their precise gradient. Using nothing more than simple sighting sticks and water levels, Sumerian surveyors calculated the minute, almost imperceptible slope of the land from the river down to the distant fields. The canals had to be dug at just the right angle, too steep, and the water would flow too fast, eroding the canals and washing away the precious topsoil. Too shallow, and the water would stagnate, choking the channels with silt and never reaching the fields. Their ability to consistently achieve this perfect gradient across vast distances is a testament to a profound, hands-on understanding of hydrology and geometry. From these great arterial canals, a branching network of smaller secondary and tertiary channels carried the water ever closer to the farms. Gates made of wood or woven reeds, operated by teams of dedicated water managers, controlled the flow into each district. This allowed for a meticulously scheduled rotation, ensuring that water reached every field in its turn and preventing any one area from hoarding the supply. The excess water and the dangerous seasonal floods were managed by an equally sophisticated system of dikes or embankments, built parallel to the rivers to contain overflow, and a series of large, strategic reservoirs designed to capture and store floodwaters for use during the dry summer months. This entire network required constant, relentless maintenance. An army of laborers was employed to continuously dredge the canals of the silt that the slow-moving water deposited, preventing the system from choking on its own success. The impact of this technological marvel cannot be overstated. It was the irrigation system that truly unlocked the agricultural potential of the Fertile Crescent. By controlling the water, the Sumerians transformed previously unusable marshland and parched plains into a predictable, immensely productive agricultural engine. They could now practice systematic, large-scale agriculture, growing not one but two crops a year. This reliability supercharged the food surplus, which in turn supported the dense urban populations that defined Sumerian civilization. The city of Uruk, at its height, is estimated to have been home to between 50 and 80,000 people, a concentration of humanity that would have been utterly impossible without the secure food supply guaranteed by this hydraulic network. Furthermore, the canals themselves became new transportation routes, integrating the economy even further. Goods and people could move by barge through the canals, connecting city to city and field to port with an efficiency that land travel couldn't match. This intricate, man-made watershed became the central nervous system of Sumer, a life-giving lattice of water that sustained every aspect of their society. It stands as one of their most enduring legacies, a physical manifestation of their core belief that through ingenuity, cooperation, and sheer force of will, humanity could bring order to chaos and build a civilization in the most unlikely of places. But taming the waters and the land required more than just engineering might. It demanded a new language of measurement and calculation, a way to quantify the world itself. This brings us to one of the most enduring and intellectually profound of all Sumerian contributions, their unique number system. While we count in tens, a system based on the simple fact that we have 10 fingers, the Sumerians made a vastly more sophisticated choice. They built their entire mathematical world on the number 60. This sexagesimal, or base 60, system is not some forgotten relic. Its echoes are all around us, governing our every day. Every time you check the clock and see 60 minutes in an hour, or consider the 360 degrees of a perfect circle, you are engaging with a 6,000-year-old Sumerian innovation. The reasons for choosing 60 are a testament to their mathematical genius. Unlike 10, which is only divisible by 1, 2, 5, and itself, the number 60 is a superior, highly composite number. This means it can be divided neatly in a multitude of ways by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60 itself. For a civilization deeply engaged in complex trade, land division, and astronomical calculations, this divisibility was a godsend. It made fractions incredibly easy to work with. Splitting a bushel of grain, a plot of land, or a unit of time into halves, thirds, quarters, or fifths could all be done within the base 60 system without encountering messy, repeating decimals. It was, quite simply, the most practical and elegant computational tool the ancient world ever produced. Their method of writing these numbers was equally brilliant, utilizing a form of place value notation that would not be seen again in the West for thousands of years. They used just two simple cuneiform signs, a small wedge-shaped impression for the number 1, and a larger, sideways chevron for the number 10. To write the number 59, a scribe would simply combine 5 10 signs and 9 1 signs. The true magic, however, happened when they reached 60. They did not invent a new symbol. Instead, they moved to the next place. A single 1 sign in the next column to the left didn't mean 1 anymore, it meant 60. This is conceptually identical to our own system, where a 1 in the tens column means 10. This abstract leap of understanding that a numeral's value is determined by its position was a monumental intellectual achievement that laid the groundwork for all future mathematics. The evidence of their prowess is preserved on thousands of baked clay tablets, which reveal a level of mathematical thought that is nothing short of astonishing. We have school tablets from the city of Nippur, where young scribes in training practiced multiplication and reciprocals, the key to their division process. We have administrative tablets calculating compound interest on silver loans over decades. But the most baffling are the advanced academic tablets, like the famed Plimpton 322 from Lhasa. This tablet is not a simple account ledger. It is a table of Pythagorean triples, sets of 3 whole numbers that perfectly describe the sides of a right triangle, like 3, 4, 5. The sheer computational effort to generate these 15 sets of triples, using their base 60 system, indicates a formal, abstract understanding of mathematical principles that historians once believed were discovered by the Greeks over a millennium later. It strongly suggests the Sumerians, or their immediate successors, the Babylonians, who inherited this knowledge, understood the relationship between the sides of a right triangle long before Pythagoras was even born. Furthermore, other tablets show them solving what we would now call quadratic equations and performing calculations to approximate square roots. These were not merely practical problems about building walls or digging canals. They were theoretical exercises, the kind of abstract math practiced for its own sake and for the training of an advanced scholarly elite. This paints a picture of a society that saw numbers not just as tools for commerce and construction, but as a fundamental language of the cosmos. Their base 60 system was so effective, so perfectly suited to both the practical and the theoretical, that it became the international standard of the ancient world for astronomy and higher mathematics, its influence persisting stubbornly through the ages to tick away on our wrists and define our geometry to this very day. While their mathematics gave them a language to describe the cosmos, their true genius lay in applying it to the heavens above, achieving a level of astronomical insight that remains one of history's most profound mysteries. Without a single lens or telescope, the Sumerian sky watchers, likely a specialized class of priest astronomers attached to the great temple ziggurats, meticulously charted the night sky for centuries. Their primary canvas was the vast, unobstructed Mesopotamian plain, and their tools were simple but effective, sighting rods to measure angles, water clocks to mark the passage of time, and an unwavering, disciplined dedication to recording everything they saw on countless clay tablets. From this relentless observation, they built a scientific legacy that would form the bedrock of all Western astronomy. Their most fundamental achievement was the creation of the world's first known star catalogues and constellations. They didn't just see random patterns of light, they organized the chaos into a coherent celestial map, assigning names and divine narratives to star groups. We know many of these figures today, though by their later Greek names. The constellation we call Pegasus was known to them as the Great Horse, while Taurus was the Bull of Heaven, a celestial creature featured prominently in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But their observations went far beyond simple storytelling. They carefully tracked the movements of the 5 visible planets Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which they understood were different from the fixed stars because of their erratic, wandering paths against the backdrop of the heavens. They recorded the cycles of Venus with such precision that we have tablets, like the famous Venus tablet of Amasajuka, which document its appearances and disappearances as both a morning and evening star over a period of 21 years. Perhaps their most staggering accomplishment was their understanding of a phenomenon so slow and subtle that it is virtually undetectable without careful records kept over generations: the precession of the equinoxes. This is a gradual wobble in Earth's axis that causes the position of the equinoxes to shift backward through the constellations of the zodiac over a cycle of approximately 26,000 years. The Sumerians are believed to have detected this shift by meticulously comparing their own star charts with those from centuries earlier. Their solution to mapping this grand celestial cycle was the invention of the zodiac. They divided the path of the sun, the ecliptic, into 12 equal sections of 30 degrees each section named after the constellation that resided there. This 12-sign zodiac was not merely for astrology. It was a sophisticated mathematical coordinate system that allowed them to accurately predict the positions of celestial bodies and track the slow precessional drift with a precision that seems almost impossible for their era. This predictive power reached its zenith with their ability to forecast lunar eclipses. They discovered the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 18 years and 11 days after which the sun, earth, and moon return to nearly the same relative geometry, and a similar pattern of eclipses will occur. By keeping detailed records of past eclipses over many of these cycles, they could predict the likelihood of an eclipse occurring in the future. A tablet from the city of Uruk contains a text that essentially reads as a warning: if an eclipse occurs on the 14th day of the month, the king will die, there will be a plague of locusts. While the omens were superstition, the astronomical prediction behind them was hard science. The ability to foresee such a terrifying event, when the moon turned a bloody red and seemed to be consumed by darkness, would have granted the priestly astronomers immense power and authority, reinforcing the belief that they could literally read the will of the gods in the stars. The question of how they achieved all this without advanced technology has fueled speculation for decades. The mainstream academic view is that it was the product of relentless, patient observation over countless generations, with knowledge carefully passed down and refined by a scholarly elite within the temples. Their base 60 mathematical system gave them the perfect computational tool to calculate complex cycles. However, the sheer accuracy of their results has led to more alternative theories. Some researchers point to the fact that their astronomical knowledge seems to appear almost fully formed in the earliest records, suggesting they may have inherited it from a now-lost precursor culture. Others have wondered if their meticulous charts were not just for religious purposes, but could have been used for practical navigation, perhaps even for long-distance sea travel that we have yet to fully uncover. Whatever the source, their legacy is undeniable. They transformed the sky from a realm of capricious gods into an orderly, predictable clockwork of mathematical relationships, a conceptual leap that marks the true birth of astronomical science and continues to guide our understanding of the universe millennia later. This systematic production of a literate class was the engine of the entire Sumerian state. Graduates of the Adaba did not simply become clerks, they became the administrators, the diplomats, the engineers, the judges, and the physicians. They were the ones who calculated the rations for thousands of workers building a ziggurat, drafted the treaties between rival city-states, presided over complex inheritance disputes, and compiled the first known pharmacopoeias listing medicinal herbs and their uses. This formalized, state-sponsored education created the world's first true bureaucracy, a class of professionals whose authority was derived not from noble birth or military prowess, but from demonstrable skill and knowledge. It was the birth of the meritocratic ideal, however limited, and it allowed Sumerian civilization to achieve a level of organizational complexity and stability that was unprecedented in human history. The Adaba, therefore, was far more than a school. It was the institution that made all other institutions possible, safeguarding and advancing the collective knowledge of a civilization and ensuring its legacy would endure, quite literally written in stone for millennia to come. Yet the intellectual achievements of the Adaba and the celestial observations from the ziggurats peak were all made possible by the physical heart of the Sumerian world, the city itself. The leap from scattered villages to the world's first urban centers was perhaps their most radical invention of all. Sumerian cities like Ur, Uruk, and Eridu were not organic, haphazard collections of buildings. They were meticulously planned metropolitan wonders, demonstrating a visionary approach to communal living on a scale never before attempted. These were not just places where people lived, they were deliberate, complex machines for civilization, designed with an understanding of economics, defense, sanitation, and social organization that feels startlingly modern. At the core of their urban design was the principle of the sacred center. Every Sumerian city was built around a towering, awe-inspiring complex known as the temple precinct, dominated by its ziggurat. Radiating out from this religious and administrative heart was a surprisingly organized network of streets. Unlike the winding, chaotic alleys of later medieval towns, many Sumerian cities, particularly those like Ur that were rebuilt over time, featured broad, main processional avenues that ran straight from the city gates to the temple district, intersected by narrower but still deliberately laid out cross streets. This created a loosely grid-like pattern that facilitated the movement of people, goods, and soldiers. The city was then divided into distinct functional zones. There were dedicated residential quarters where houses of mud brick shared walls in dense neighborhoods, their doors opening onto courtyards rather than the main streets for privacy. Separate industrial districts housed workshops for metalworkers, potters, and weavers, their locations likely chosen to contain noise, fire risk, and pollution away from the elite areas. There were also large, open public squares for markets and gatherings, all encircled by a massive, defensive wall that was both a military necessity and a powerful symbol of civic identity, separating the ordered world within from the chaotic wilderness beyond. But the ultimate symbol of this urban order, the structure that defined the Sumerian skyline and mindset, was the ziggurat. This was not a tomb like the Egyptian pyramids. It was a profoundly spiritual and engineering marvel, a literal stairway to heaven. The ziggurat was a massive, solid-stepped pyramid, built as a series of ascending, squared platforms, each level smaller than the one below, creating a towering structure that could reach over 150 feet in height. At its summit stood a small, sacred shrine, believed to be the dwelling place of the city's patron deity, a place where the divine would descend to meet humanity. The construction process was a monumental feat of logistics and labor organization that could take generations. It began with the production of millions of identical, sun-dried mud bricks for the core. But the true ingenuity lay in the outer layer. For this, they fired bricks in massive kilns, creating a much harder, weather-resistant material. These baked bricks were then bound together not with simple mud mortar, but with bitumen, a naturally occurring asphalt that seeped up from the ground in parts of Mesopotamia. This thick, black, tar-like substance was heated and used as waterproof cement, creating a formidable barrier against the region's rare but devastating rains that would have otherwise melted a plain mud brick structure. The construction techniques themselves reveal a deep understanding of physics and project management. There is no evidence they used cranes or pulleys. Instead, the primary method for raising millions of bricks to such great heights was the inclined ramp. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive, spiraling ramps made of packed earth and rubble, built directly against the sides of the rising structure. Teams of laborers would drag brick-laden sledges up these gentle slopes, a continuous human chain moving the building materials skyward. The entire project was guided by precise mathematical proportions and a sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. The sides of the ziggurat were meticulously oriented to the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west with an accuracy that suggests careful celestial alignment. The staircases that ran up its front were often perfectly aligned with significant astronomical events, such as the rising of a particular star or the solstice sun. This means the ziggurat was not just a building, it was a colossal calendar and a cosmic observatory made of brick, connecting the rhythms of the city directly to the cycles of the cosmos. It stood as the ultimate expression of the Sumerian worldview, a belief that through collective effort, technical mastery, and divine favor, they could build a mountain of order in the flat, unpredictable plain and reach for the gods themselves. Yet even as they reshaped their world with brick and bronze, another revolution was quietly spinning to life in the workshops of Sumer, one that would transform the most humble of objects into an engine of commerce. For millennia, pottery had been a slow, painstaking craft. A potter would coil long ropes of clay, stacking and smoothing them by hand to form a vessel, a process that was as much art as it was labor. But around 3,129 years before the Common Era, an anonymous Sumerian artisan made a leap of logic that would change everything. This individual likely took a simple, heavy stone disc, a turntable used for finishing pots, and realized that if it could be made to spin freely, the momentum of the wheel itself could do much of the work. The first true potter's wheel was born, and with it the very concept of mass production. The earliest versions were simple affairs known as slow wheels. These were heavy stone discs with a pivot point on the bottom that fit into a socketed stone base. The potter, or an assistant, would give the wheel a push to start it spinning, and the potter would then have a short window of time to use the rotational force to raise the walls of a vessel from a single lump of clay. This technique, known as throwing, required incredible skill and timing, but the results were revolutionary. Instead of the slightly lumpy, asymmetrical pots made by coiling, a skilled potter could now produce a vessel with perfect, flawless symmetry in a fraction of the time. The technology evolved rapidly from this basic beginning. The slow wheel gave way to the much more efficient, fast wheel. This was a lighter, more balanced disc, often made of wood, that was mounted on a fixed axle. The potter could now keep the wheel spinning at a high, constant speed for much longer by kicking a heavy flywheel at the base with their foot or having an assistant turn it. This freed both of the potter's hands to work the clay, allowing for an unprecedented level of control and the creation of far more delicate and complex shapes. The final evolution was the double wheel, two stone or wooden discs connected by a long axle. The potter worked at the top wheel, while an assistant seated opposite would turn the larger, heavier bottom wheel, providing a smooth, continuous, and powerful rotational force that could be maintained for as long as needed. This new technology did far more than just speed up production. It fundamentally altered the economics of an entire industry. A single potter, now a master of the wheel, could produce dozens of identical, high-quality vessels in a single day. This allowed for true standardization. For the first time, you could have a standard unit of measurement, a gur of grain or a seela of oil. That was the same in every city because the pots that held them were made to a uniform size and shape. This reliability was crucial for large-scale administration, trade, and taxation. The wheel also enabled the creation of entirely new, thinner, and more refined ceramic forms that were both stronger and more elegant than anything that came before. These fine, wheel-thrown pots, often decorated with elaborate painted designs, became one of Sumer's most sought-after exports. They have been found in archaeological sites from the Indus Valley to the Nile Delta, tangible proof of the reach of Mesopotamian trade networks. The potter's wheel, a simple spinning disc, had become a catalyst for industrial-scale production, international commerce, and even scientific standardization, proving that some of the most profound revolutions begin not on the battlefield or in the temple, but in the quiet, clay-spattered workshop of a thoughtful artisan. While their potters mastered the wheel and their astronomers charted the heavens, another class of Sumerian specialists was engaged in a far more intimate form of mastery, the art of healing. The common perception of ancient medicine often involves little more than superstition and guesswork, but the medical tablets unearthed from the ruins of cities like Nippur and reveal a system of healthcare that was astonishingly systematic, empirical, and advanced. This was not mere folk magic. It was a sophisticated proto-science of diagnosis and treatment, codified into what many historians consider the world's first known pharmacopoeia and medical handbook. The foundation of Sumerian medicine was a surprisingly modern-sounding process of diagnosis. A physician, known as an aziyu, which literally translates to water expert, would begin not with a ritual but with a careful examination. They would observe the patient's symptoms, ask questions about their condition, and often perform a detailed inspection of bodily fluids and pulses. These observations were then meticulously compared against a vast library of diagnostic clay tablets. These tablets functioned as medical textbooks structured in a logical, if-then format. They would list a set of symptoms and then provide a corresponding prognosis and prescription. For instance, a tablet might state, if a man's body is yellow, his eyes are yellow, and he is lethargic, then he suffers from the yellow illness. This condition, which we now recognize as jaundice, was accurately identified as a specific syndrome with a predictable course. The treatments prescribed were where their knowledge truly shines. The Sumerians utilized a vast materia medica of over 250 distinct substances, each carefully selected and prepared. Their medicines were overwhelmingly plant-based, derived from a deep understanding of local botany. They used myrrh and thyme as antiseptics, powdered mandrake root as a surgical anesthetic, and licorice and mint to soothe digestive ailments. But they didn't stop at herbs. Their pharmacopoeia included mineral compounds such as salt and potassium nitrate for cleansing wounds, and animal products like milk, snake skin, and even crushed turtle shell. Most remarkably, they engaged in early chemistry, preparing medicines by filtering, boiling, pulverizing, and dissolving ingredients in solvents like beer, wine, and oil to extract their active properties. They created salves, poultices, suppositories, and medicated enemas, demonstrating a sophisticated grasp of how to deliver a drug into the human body effectively. This practical knowledge suggests an understanding of human anatomy that was far more detailed than once believed. While they did not practice dissection in the Greek tradition, their experience with animal sacrifices and undoubtedly with treating traumatic wounds from battle and construction accidents gave them a working knowledge of the body's inner structures. They understood the function of major organs, the difference between arteries and veins, and even the skeletal system. Tablets detail procedures for setting broken bones with splints, lancing abscesses to drain pus, and even what appear to be early attempts at cataract surgery. Perhaps most baffling of all are concepts that seem to prefigure the germ theory of disease by millennia. They had specific rituals for purification that involved extensive washing with special solutions, and they understood the concept of contagion, isolating individuals with certain infectious diseases to prevent their spread. They recognized that unseen agents in contaminated water or food could cause illness, hence the physician's title of water expert. This was not an understanding of microbes as we know it, but it was a profound empirical observation that cleanliness and isolation were crucial to health, a principle that would be forgotten and only rediscovered thousands of years later. The role of the healer, however, existed in a fascinating dualistic world. While their methods were often practical and observational, they were still deeply intertwined with the spiritual. The Sumerians believed that illness could be caused by natural means, but also by supernatural ones, the curse of a demon, the displeasure of a god, or the witchcraft of an enemy. Therefore, the aziyu was often also an exorcist, the ashapu. A full treatment might involve both a practical prescription of a willow bark tea for pain and inflammation, paired with an incantation to drive out the demon believed to have caused the affliction. This wasn't seen as contradictory. It was a holistic approach that addressed both the physical and the perceived spiritual causes of suffering. This blend of the empirical and the spiritual makes their achievements all the more striking. It reveals a culture that was actively trying to make sense of the world through both observation and belief, laying down the earliest foundations of a science that would seek natural causes, even as it acknowledged forces beyond human control. Their ability to predict celestial events and structure their society was all governed by a final, crucial invention, one so fundamental that we still live by its rhythms today. While they looked to the stars for grand cycles, they also needed a practical tool to organize their daily lives, their religious festivals, and their agricultural year. The solution they devised was nothing short of a complete reimagining of time itself. The world's first accurate calendar, a complex and beautiful system that harmonized the moon's silver cycles with the sun's golden journey across the sky. The primary building block of their calendar was the most obvious celestial clock, the moon. They carefully tracked the lunar cycle from the first sliver of a new crescent to the full, glowing orb and back to darkness. They determined that this cycle averaged about 29.5 days. To make this work in a practical system, they created a year of 12 lunar months. Each month began with the first sighting of the new crescent moon, a moment that required official sky watchers to scan the western horizon at dusk. To account for that half-day, months alternated between 29 and 30 days in length. They gave these months beautiful, poetic names that reflected the agricultural and religious rhythm of their year, like the month of barley harvest, the month of offering the hoe, or the month of the fog. But a calendar based purely on the moon quickly falls out of sync with the seasons, which are dictated by the solar year. 12 lunar months only add up to about 354 days, leaving a deficit of roughly 11 days compared to the 365.25 days it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun. If left uncorrected, a purely lunar calendar would see the month of barley harvest gradually drift into the winter, completely disconnecting their religious and agricultural festivals from the actual seasons. The Sumerian solution to this problem was a stroke of pure administrative genius, the intercalary month. They understood that every few years they needed to add an entire extra 13th month to the year to reset the calendar and keep it in line with the solar cycle. This wasn't a haphazard decision. It was a carefully calculated practice, likely based on the 19-year Metonic cycle, where the phases of the moon realign with the same calendar dates. A royal decree would be issued announcing the addition of this second month of whatever, ensuring that the all-important New Year festival, Akitu, always occurred at the spring equinox when life was bursting back into the world. This mastery of large-scale time was matched by their revolutionary division of the day itself. They are the reason we have 24 hours in a day and 60 minutes in an hour. Using their base 60 system, they divided the period from one sunrise to the next into 12 equal parts, which we would call 2-hour watches. The night was similarly divided into another 12 watches, tracked by the movement of specific stars across the night sky. This gave them a full 24 divisions. Their tools for this were simple but effective. During the day, they used sundials and marked shadow lengths, and at night, they used water clocks known as clepsydras. These were ceramic pots with a small hole in the bottom that would drain at a constant rate. Markings on the inside of the pot would indicate the passage of a specific unit of time as the water level fell. This ability to quantify the hour was vital for the complex administration of their cities, for scheduling temple rituals that had to occur at precise moments, and for the astronomers who needed to time the movements of the stars. The legacy of this system is literally all around us, ticking away on our wrists and governing our schedules. Every time you glance at a clock face divided into 60 minutes, you are seeing a direct gift from the Sumerian mathematicians of Uruk. Their calendar, with its intercalary month, became the model for nearly all subsequent ancient calendars, including the Hebrew and Babylonian systems, and its echoes are even found in the Islamic calendar today. It represents one of their most profound and enduring achievements, the translation of a chaotic, natural universe into a precise, measurable, and predictable order. They didn't just invent a way to mark days, they gave humanity the conceptual framework to plan for the future, to honor the past, and to synchronize the immense, collaborative effort of civilization itself, proving that the ultimate technology of control is not over space or material, but over time. While their calendar measured the grand passage of seasons and their medicine healed the human body, the Sumerians also turned their ingenuity towards a far more delicate art, the transformation of Earth itself into objects of stunning beauty and deception. In the fiery heart of their kilns, they achieved an alchemy that would not be seen again for over 1,000 years, manipulating common sand into one of the most magical and versatile materials ever created. Around 2,500 years before the Common Era, in workshops likely attached to the great temples or royal palaces, Sumerian artisans pioneered the controlled production of glass. This was not the clear, transparent glass of our modern windows. Theirs was an opaque, brilliantly colored material, prized for its resemblance to semi-precious stones. The process began with a sophisticated recipe that reveals a deep, experimental understanding of chemistry. The primary ingredient was silica, which they obtained from the pure white sands of the riverbanks or by grinding down quartz pebbles. To this, they added a flux, a substance that drastically lowers the melting point of silica. Their flux of choice was soda, likely derived from the ashes of certain salt-loving plants that grew in the marshy regions or from naturally occurring deposits of natron. The third crucial component was lime, probably introduced unintentionally as an impurity in their sand or soda ash. We now know that lime acts as a stabilizer, preventing the glass from dissolving in water over time. The fact that their glass objects have survived for millennia indicates they consistently used a mixture that contained it, a happy accident of chemistry that granted their creations immortality. Mixing these three components, silica, soda, and lime, they created a basic frit. This mixture was then placed in specially designed, high-temperature crucibles and fired in their already advanced reverberatory furnaces at temperatures approaching 1,000 degrees Celsius. The heat transformed the gritty powder into a molten, viscous liquid. Once cooled, this material could be ground up again into a colored powder, ready for its final shaping. Artisans would then pack this colored frit into a clay mold around a core of clay and dung, often in the shape of a small vase or a decorative amulet. The entire thing was returned to the kiln. During this second firing, the frit would melt once more, fusing into a solid, glassy object that took the exact shape of the mold. After it cooled, the brittle clay core was carefully scraped out, leaving behind a hollow glass vessel. For beads, the process was simpler. They would often simply wind a thread of molten glass around a metal rod. The most astonishing application of this technology, however, was not in creating original colors, but in perfectly replicating one of the most valued and sacred materials in the ancient world, lapis lazuli. True lapis was incredibly rare, sourced from a single remote mountain range in modern-day Afghanistan. Its deep, celestial blue, often flecked with golden pyrite that looked like stars, made it the stone of the gods, reserved for the most sacred objects and the highest levels of nobility. The Sumerian glassmakers set out to create an artificial version, and their success is a landmark in the history of material science. Through meticulous experimentation, they discovered that by adding minute amounts of cobalt, a metal they likely had access to from Iranian sources, to their glass mix, they could produce a color that was virtually identical to the finest Afghan lapis. They even mastered the technique of embedding tiny specks of gold leaf or a different, brassy-colored glass into the blue matrix to mimic the natural pyrite inclusions. This was far more than simple imitation. It was a technological triumph. It demonstrated a profound understanding that the properties of a material could be not just discovered but engineered. By reverse engineering the visual essence of a priceless stone from common, local materials, they democratized beauty and sanctity. A priest who could not afford a large lapis lazuli amulet could now own a perfect glass replica that held the same symbolic power. This practice of creating artificial precious materials would become a hallmark of sophisticated ancient cultures, but the Sumerians were the first. Their artificial lapis lazuli stands as a powerful symbol of their worldview, that human ingenuity could not only harness nature but improve upon it, creating wonder from the most humble of ingredients. While their glassmakers were mastering the art of illusion with fire and sand, their architects were solving a much more fundamental problem of physics: how to create an opening in a wall without the whole thing collapsing. For millennia, the only way to span a space was with a simple lintel, a heavy horizontal beam of wood or stone laid across two upright supports. This method had severe limitations. The width of the opening was restricted by the length and strength of the available lintel stone, and the entire weight above the opening bore down directly on the weak point at the center of the beam. Then, around 2,000 years before the Common Era, Sumerian builders in Mesopotamia made a conceptual leap that would change architecture forever. They looked at a doorway and saw not a barrier but a curve. They invented the true arch. The genius of the arch lies in its brilliant redistribution of force. Instead of pushing straight down, the weight of the structure above the opening is transformed. Each wedge-shaped brick, known as a voussoir, is precisely cut. When these bricks are arranged in a semicircle and the final, central piece, the keystone, is locked into place at the apex, something magical happens. The downward force of gravity is converted into outward thrust along the curve of the arch. This outward push is then channeled down into the heavy walls or buttresses on either side of the opening. The arch essentially turns crushing vertical weight into managed lateral force, making the entire structure not weaker at the opening, but stronger and more stable. They built these pioneering arches using their most abundant and versatile material, the baked mud brick. These fired bricks were far stronger and more resistant to moisture than their sun-dried counterparts, providing the perfect durable wedge. To construct an arch, they first built a wooden frame, a temporary support called centering that held the bricks in place until the keystone was inserted and the arch could support itself. They would then lay the bricks radially against this frame, using bitumen mortar to secure them. Once the frame was removed, the arch stood on its own, a self-supporting marvel of engineering. But they didn't stop with a single arch. They realized that if you take a series of arches and place them one behind the other, you create a long, tunnel-like structure, the barrel vault. This was an even more revolutionary concept. For the first time, builders could roof over a large, uninterrupted interior space without needing a forest of supporting columns or those massive, weight-bearing walls. The same principle applied. The weight of the roof and anything above it was channeled as outward thrust along the entire length of the vault, requiring strong continuous walls on both sides to contain the force. Evidence of this groundbreaking work can be seen in the ruins of Ur and especially in the royal tombs. Here, we find not only arched doorways but entire burial chambers roofed with magnificent, soaring barrel vaults, all constructed entirely of baked brick. Walking into one of these spaces today, the effect is still breathtaking. The sense of enclosed, protected space is profound, a stark contrast to the post and lintel construction used everywhere else in the ancient world at that time. These weren't crude experiments, they were fully realized, sophisticated structures that have survived for over 4 millennia, a testament to the soundness of their engineering. This innovation predates the famed Roman aqueducts and grand arches by centuries, forcing us to completely rethink the narrative of architectural history. The Romans would later perfect the arch and vault, building taller and wider thanks to their invention of concrete, but the fundamental principle was born in the mud brick workshops of Sumer. Their invention provided the essential blueprint for every great domed cathedral, every monumental railway bridge, and every subway tunnel that would follow. It was a quiet, structural revolution that proved true strength does not always come from brute mass, but from elegant, intelligent design, a lesson etched in clay and baked for eternity. While their architects reimagined the very shape of space with arches and vaults, another form of creation was unfolding on a much more human scale, one that wove together practicality, artistry, and economic might. In the bustling courtyards of Ur and Lagash, the rhythmic clack of wooden frames provided the soundtrack to one of Sumer's most powerful economic engines, an advanced textile industry that transformed simple fibers into commodities of immense value and beauty. The Sumerians didn't just make cloth, they industrialized its production on a scale that would not be seen again until the Industrial Revolution thousands of years later, establishing textile manufacturing as one of the world's first major export industries. The entire process began with the raw material. While they worked with flax to produce linen, their true specialty was wool, and they approached its production with a scientific zeal. They didn't just shear sheep, they engaged in sophisticated selective breeding to develop distinct breeds of sheep specifically for their fleece. Cuneiform tablets from the city of Umma detail the careful management of enormous flocks, numbering in the tens of thousands, and distinguish between different grades of wool. There was ordinary wool for everyday textiles, and then there was the highly prized, finer wool from a special breed of fat-tailed sheep, which produced a softer, more luxurious fiber destined for the garments of the elite and for temple offerings. Once sheared, the wool was meticulously sorted, washed to remove grease and dirt, and then carded, brushed with spiky teasel plants or combs to align the fibers in preparation for spinning. Spinning itself was a ubiquitous skill performed by women throughout the society using a simple yet supremely effective tool, the drop spindle. This was a weighted disc made of stone or clay attached to a wooden shaft. The spinner would draw out fibers from a mass of carded wool, attaching it to the spindle and then setting it spinning, allowing the weight to twist the fibers into a strong, continuous thread as it descended toward the ground. The real revolution, however, happened next on the vertical loom. This was a significant technological leap from earlier horizontal ground looms. The vertical loom was a large, upright wooden frame that allowed the weaver to work standing up, managing a much greater width and length of fabric. The warp threads, the foundational vertical threads, were stretched taut on the frame and weighted at the bottom with baked clay loom weights to maintain tension. The weaver would then methodically pass the weft thread carried on a shuttle back and forth through the shed, the space between the alternating warp threads. This design allowed for faster production and the creation of much larger, more consistent bolts of cloth. But the true art, the magic that transformed these sturdy fabrics into objects of desire, was Sumerian chemistry, their masterful and complex dyeing techniques. They viewed plain, off-white wool as a blank canvas, and their palette was sourced from the entire known world. They discovered that the humble madder root, when crushed and fermented, could produce a spectrum of rich reds and oranges. Pomegranate rinds yielded a dull yellow, while saffron produced a much more vibrant and expensive golden hue. For greens, they would often double dye a fabric, first in yellow and then in blue. The most astonishing blues and purples came from the mineral lapis lazuli and the spiny murex sea snail, respectively, but these were incredibly rare and costly. Their most famous and vibrant red, however, came from a much smaller and rather gruesome source, the pregnant female Kermes insect. These tiny insects, harvested from the leaves of certain oak trees, were dried and crushed to a fine powder. When processed in a specific sequence with alum, a mineral salt acting as a mordant to fix the color, and fermented in urine, which provided the necessary ammonia, the powder yielded a stunning, deep crimson red that was color-fast and incredibly valuable. This one dye became a major trade good, a status symbol mentioned in royal inventories and used to dye the robes of kings and the tapestries that adorned temple walls. This was not a cottage industry, it was large-scale factory production. Cuneiform records from the city of Lagash detail enormous state-run workshops, or oikos, that employed thousands of workers, the majority of them women and children. These were highly organized facilities with a clear division of labor. Some workers were solely responsible for sorting raw wool, others for spinning, others for weaving, and the most skilled for the intricate dyeing processes. They worked to meet production quotas set by the central administration, and they were paid in rations of barley, oil, and wool. The output was staggering. One text records a single workshop producing over 60 tons of wool cloth in a single year. This cloth became the backbone of the Sumerian economy. It was used to pay state workers and soldiers. It was shipped down the Persian Gulf in vast quantities to trade for the precious metals, stones, and timber that Sumer itself lacked. A single standard-sized textile could be assigned a specific value, effectively making it a form of currency in long-distance trade. The hum of the loom was the sound of economic power, weaving together the lives of shepherds, chemists, artisans, and merchants into the very fabric of the world's first industrial economy. Yet for all the material wealth generated by their looms and forges, the Sumerians understood that a complex society could not be held together by commerce and technology alone. A city of 80,000 people with its competing interests, vast disparities in wealth, and constant potential for conflict required something more abstract but far more powerful, a shared set of rules that everyone, in theory, had to follow. Their solution was a breathtaking innovation in social organization, one that would become the invisible architecture of every civilization to follow. They invented the very concept of law itself, moving justice from the whims of powerful individuals to a codified public standard. This monumental leap began not with an anonymous administrator, but with a specific king, Ur-Nammu, the founder of the third dynasty of Ur around 2,100 years before the Common Era. Facing the monumental task of reuniting Sumer after a period of chaos and disintegration, he understood that true power came not just from military strength, but from legitimacy and order. His masterstroke was to inscribe a set of laws on a clay tablet and erect a public stele for all to see. This was the Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest known law code in human history, predating the more famous Code of Hammurabi by about 300 years. The preamble to this code is itself a revelation, stating that its purpose was to establish equity in the land and to ensure that the orphan did not fall prey to the wealthy and that the widow did not fall prey to the powerful. This establishes a profound idea that the law is a tool for protecting the vulnerable and creating a just society, a concept that feels remarkably modern. The laws themselves were structured in a clear, consistent format known as the casuistic form. If a man commits this offense, then this shall be the punishment. This if-then structure created predictability, a core principle of any legal system. For instance, one law states, if a man commits a murder, that man must be killed. Another dictates, if a man commits a robbery, he will be killed. But what is truly astonishing about Ur-Nammu's code is its overwhelming emphasis on restitution and fines rather than brutal retribution. For many bodily injuries, the prescribed punishment was not an eye for an eye, but a financial compensation paid to the victim. If a man knocks out the eye of another man, the code states, he shall weigh out half a mina of silver. This system of standardized monetary fines for specific injuries required a sophisticated understanding of value and a stable economy to function, but it represented a massive civilizing step away from endless blood feuds and cycles of violence. To administer this revolutionary system, the Sumerians had to invent an entire legal infrastructure. They established formal courts, which were often located in the temple precinct or at the city gate, the bustling centers of public life. These courts were not run solely by the king. They were typically presided over by a panel of judges or dikkard, who were often prominent elders, temple officials, or representatives of the merchant guilds. This introduced the concept of a peer judgment, a move away from autocratic decree. The court procedures were meticulously designed to seek truth. Witnesses were required to give testimony under oath, invoking the names of the gods to ensure honesty. Written contracts inscribed on clay tablets and witnessed by multiple parties were given immense weight as evidence. In many cases, the courts could even call for a form of divine arbitration, known as the river ordeal, where the accused would be thrown into the sacred river. If they survived, the gods had proclaimed their innocence. This entire legal apparatus, the written code, the courts, the judges, and the procedures, was a technology of social organization as vital as the plow or the arch. It created something every complex society desperately needs: predictability. A merchant could enter into a contract knowing the state would enforce it. A farmer could know the exact penalty for accidentally damaging a neighbor's irrigation ditch. This predictability reduced conflict, enabled trust between strangers, and encouraged the long-term investment and economic cooperation that allows a civilization to flourish. It transferred the power of judgment from the strong to the system, establishing the radical idea that the law was king, not the other way around. The Code of Urnamo was more than a list of rules. It was the operating manual for a society too large and too intricate to manage through personal relationships alone. A foundational blueprint for justice that we are still refining and striving toward over 4,000 years later. Yet for all the grandeur of their laws and the complexity of their trade, perhaps the most universally beloved Sumerian innovation was one that brought people together in celebration and community. A technology born not in a king's court but in the warm, fragrant air of a brewery. The Sumerians hold the undisputed title of the world's first master brewers, with archaeological evidence from the ancient city of Godin Tepe in modern-day Iran, revealing chemical traces of beer in pottery vessels dating back to 3,500 years before the Common Era. For them, beer was far more than a simple alcoholic beverage. It was a sacred gift from the gods, a staple of their daily diet, and the very currency of social and religious life. The process they developed was a fascinating and ingenious multi-step operation that reveals a deep, if instinctive, understanding of biochemistry. It all began with barley, the primary grain of Mesopotamia. The first crucial step was malting. Barley was soaked in large vats of water until it began to sprout. This germination process activated enzymes within the grain that are essential for converting its stored starches into fermentable sugars. The Sumerians then expertly halted this germination by gently drying the sprouted grain in the sun or over a low kiln, preserving these powerful enzymes. This malted barley was then ground into a coarse flour, but here is where their technique takes a surprising turn. Instead of simply mixing this malted flour with water, they baked it into a special twice-baked barley bread called bapir. This hard, biscuit-like bread was durable, storable, and could be crumbled into a fermentation vat whenever brewing was to begin. This method of using bread may have been a happy accident, a discovery made when a piece of old bread was left in rainwater and began to ferment, but the Sumerians perfected it into a reliable science. The crumbled bapir was then mixed with water and dates in large fermentation vessels. The dates provided not only additional sugar to boost the alcohol content, but also wild yeast that naturally lived on their skins. These yeasts were the real magic makers, the invisible workforce that consumed the sugars and produced both alcohol and carbon dioxide. The Sumerians maintained these fermentation vats with great care, often keeping them in warm places to encourage the yeast to thrive. They did not understand microbiology, but through generations of trial and error, they learned to cultivate and reuse these yeasts, effectively domesticating wild strains to consistently produce a stable, palatable brew. The final mixture was not filtered as we would today. It was a thick, porridge-like substance full of grain solids and sediment. This consistency led to one of the most iconic images of Sumerian drinking culture, the straw. Their beer was so full of floating husks and bits of bread that drinking it directly from the vessel would have been a gritty, unpleasant experience. Their elegant solution was the siphon straw. These were often made from reeds or precious metals for the wealthy, and many had a built-in filter, a small perforated piece of metal or wood attached to the bottom end to strain out the largest particles. Scenes depicted on cylinder seals and stone plaques show groups of people sitting around a large communal pot, each with their own straw, sharing in the convivial experience. It was a powerful symbol of equality and community, a moment where social boundaries could soften over a shared jar of beer. The Sumerian brewers' expertise extended far beyond a single generic beverage. Cuneiform tablets, including the famous Hymn to Ninkasi, which is both a prayer to the goddess of beer and a detailed recipe, describe them creating at least 8 distinct types of beer. They had light and dark beers, sweet beers enhanced with extra honey or dates, and beers with varying alcohol contents, from a weak, daily drinking beer to strong, special occasion brews with designations like good, very good, and strong. This was not a haphazard craft, it was a sophisticated, standardized industry. Beer was a fundamental part of the daily ration for workers, particularly those laboring on the great ziggurats and canals, with texts from showing that laborers received a generous allotment of roughly 1 liter of beer per day. It provided crucial calories, nutrients, and vitamins from the fermented grain, and its alcohol content made it safer to drink than water from irrigation canals, which could be contaminated. From the highest temple right to the lowliest worker's lunch, beer was the liquid that truly fueled the engine of Sumerian civilization, a testament to their ability to transform the most basic ingredients through patient innovation into something that nourished both the body and the soul. Yet even with their mastery of irrigation and the basic plow, the Sumerians were not content. They understood that true agricultural power lay not just in preparing the soil, but in optimizing every single step of the growing process. Their most brilliant solution to this challenge was a machine of such elegant complexity that it would not be rivaled in efficiency for over 3,000 years. This was the cedar plow, a single implement that fundamentally redefined the act of sowing and became the cornerstone of their unprecedented agricultural surplus. Imagine the scene before its invention. A farmer first guiding his ox-drawn ard plow back and forth across a field, painstakingly opening up furrows in the tough earth. Once that was done, he would have to walk the same field again, this time with a basket of precious seed, carefully scattering it by hand into the new furrows. This two-step process was not only time-consuming and labor-intensive, but it was also wildly inefficient. Seeds scattered by hand would fall unevenly, some landing too deep in the furrow, others left exposed on the surface to be eaten by birds, and most clumped together, leading to overcrowded plants that would compete for sunlight and nutrients. The wastage was enormous and the resulting crops were unpredictable. The cedar plow or seed drill eliminated all of this guesswork in one breathtakingly simple mechanical motion. It was a modification of the standard ard plow to which the Sumerians added a sophisticated seed delivery system. The key component was a vertical tube, often made of hollow reed or wood, that was attached to the back of the plowshare. This tube ran from a seed hopper mounted on the plow's frame down to a point just behind the cutting blade. As the plow was pulled forward, the share did its usual work of slicing a neat furrow into the soil. Immediately behind it, the seeds would trickle down from the hopper through this tube and be deposited directly into the freshly opened trench. A small blade or chain attached to the bottom of the tube would then sweep loose soil back over the seed, covering it perfectly. The true genius of the mechanism, however, lay in its metering device. The flow of seeds from the hopper couldn't be a constant stream. It had to be regulated to ensure consistent spacing. The Sumerians solved this with a simple yet precise component, a small wheel or axle that passed through the bottom of the hopper. As the plow moved, this wheel, driven by the rotation of the plow's own wheels or by a ground-driven chain, would turn. Pegs or small cups on this wheel would scoop up individual seeds from the hopper and carry them to the top of their rotation, at which point they would drop into the open end of the seed tube. The speed of the plow directly controlled the speed of this seed wheel, ensuring that the rate of seeding was perfectly synchronized with the forward motion. This meant that each seed was placed at a uniform depth and at a consistent, optimal distance from the next, all in a single, continuous pass. The impact of this invention on agricultural productivity is almost impossible to overstate. It was a quantum leap in efficiency. A single farmer with a team of oxen could now plow and seed a field in half the time with half the labor, but the real gains were in the yield. By placing each seed at the ideal depth, it was protected from birds and from drying out in the sun, dramatically improving germination rates. The precise spacing prevented overcrowding, allowing each plant ample room to grow strong roots and access to soil nutrients, which resulted in healthier, larger heads of grain. This meticulous machine-assisted planting supercharged the already impressive Sumerian food surplus, providing the caloric foundation that supported their dense urban populations, their standing armies, and their class of specialized artisans and scholars. The cedar plow was more than a tool. It was the mechanical heart of their civilization, a perfect fusion of animal power, human ingenuity, and a deep, empirical understanding of the land that fed them. But to truly appreciate the scale of their agricultural and brewing achievements, we must turn to another industry that clothed, protected, and equipped their society, one that transformed raw animal hides into one of the most versatile materials of the ancient world. In the sun-baked workshops on the outskirts of a Sumerian city, artisans engaged in a process that was equal parts chemistry, craftsmanship, and what we might today consider sheer audacity. This was the ancient art of tanning, and the Sumerians elevated it to a sophisticated technology, mastering methods so effective that we still puzzle over their precise formulas today. The journey from a freshly skinned animal hide to a supple, durable piece of leather was a long and complex one, beginning with a critical first step: purification. A raw hide, if left untreated, will quickly rot and decompose. The Sumerians' first task was to remove all flesh, fat, and hair from the skin. They started by soaking the hides in large vats of water, sometimes adding lime or wood ash to create an alkaline solution that would loosen the hair and begin to break down the proteins. They would then painstakingly scrape the inner and outer surfaces with curved bronze scrapers, a skilled and physically demanding job that required a deep understanding of the material to avoid cutting or damaging the precious hide. The true magic, the alchemy that transformed this unstable organic material into a stable, rot-resistant product, was the tanning process itself. Astonishingly, the Sumerians employed not one, but 3 distinct tanning methods, each producing a leather with different properties. The first, and perhaps most intriguing, was brain tanning. They discovered that every animal possesses just enough brain matter to tan its own hide. The brains would be mashed into a paste mixed with water and worked meticulously into the hide. The natural emulsifying oils and lecithin in the brain tissue would bond with the collagen fibers in the skin, creating an incredibly soft, supple leather that was often smoked over a fire to make it water-resistant. This method, still used by some traditional tanners today, produces a luxuriously soft leather ideal for clothing. A second, far less fragrant method involved the use of urine. Large jars filled with human and animal urine were set out to ferment, a process that produces ammonia. Hides were soaked in this pungent ammonia bath, which acted as a powerful agent to break down fibers and prepare the skin for the final tanning stage. The third and most technologically significant method was vegetable tanning. The Sumerians learned that certain plants, like the bark of oak trees or the pods of the acacia tree, contained high concentrations of tannic acid. By soaking hides in large pits filled with a broth made from these crushed plants, they achieved a chemical reaction that permanently stabilized the collagen fibers. This vegetable tanned leather was exceptionally strong, rigid, and highly resistant to water, making it the perfect material for armor, shields, and durable containers. The finished leather was then put to use in an astounding array of applications that supported nearly every facet of Sumerian life. For the military, leather was a strategic material. They crafted tough, boiled leather cuirasses for body armor, laminated layers together to create lightweight yet effective shields, and fashioned durable caps and helmets. For the everyday citizen, leather provided practical footwear in the form of simple sandals and closed-toe shoes, protecting feet from the hot, rough ground. It was used for sturdy straps, harnesses, and reins for their oxen and chariot teams, essential for agriculture and transportation. Perhaps one of the most ingenious uses was the creation of water bags and wineskins. A carefully sewn and treated goatskin could hold water or wine without leaking, becoming a vital technology for travelers, merchants, and soldiers on the move. But one of its most culturally significant applications was as a writing surface. While clay tablets were excellent for permanent records, they were heavy and fragile. For documents that needed to be lighter and more portable, like letters, trade agreements, or military dispatches, the Sumerians used leather scrolls. These were thin sheets of specially prepared leather, scraped to a smooth finish that could be written on with ink and then rolled up for easy transport. This practice directly preceded the use of parchment and vellum, which would become the standard writing materials of the ancient and medieval worlds. The Sumerian tannery, therefore, was not just a workshop for mundane goods. It was a hub of chemical innovation that supplied the materials for defense, commerce, communication, and daily comfort, proving that their technological brilliance extended even to the mastery of skin itself. Amidst the clatter of industry and the solemnity of their courts, the Sumerians cultivated another dimension of their civilization, one that speaks directly to the human soul, a profound and sophisticated musical tradition. While music itself is as old as humanity, the Sumerians bestowed upon it a gift of unparalleled importance. They gave it a memory. Around 2,000 years before the Common Era, in the temple schools and royal courts of cities like they accomplished something astonishing. They invented the world's first system of musical notation, a set of instructions etched into clay that could preserve a musical piece for millennia. This remarkable innovation was not for simple folk tunes. It was a formal, academic system designed to record the intricate harmonies and melodies of their sacred hymns. The most famous example is a nearly complete tablet known as the Hurrian Hymn to Nickel, discovered in the ancient city of Ugarit. While the tablet itself is later from the neighboring Hurrian culture, the musical system it uses is a direct inheritance from Sumer. The notation doesn't consist of notes on a staff as we know it. Instead, it is a complex cuneiform text that functions as a detailed set of instructions for a singer accompanied by a 9-stringed lyre. The tablet precisely indicates which strings should be played and in what order, providing both the tuning of the instrument and the melodic line for the vocalist. This was not a vague reminder. It was a precise recipe meant to accurately reconstruct a specific musical composition, allowing a piece of music to be performed exactly as the composer intended, long after their voice had fallen silent. This entire system was built upon a foundation of advanced acoustic science. The Sumerians possessed a deep, practical understanding of harmonics and mathematical ratios, knowledge they applied to the construction and tuning of their instruments. They understood the relationship between string length, tension, and pitch. By dividing a vibrating string in specific mathematical proportions, they could generate the perfect intervals, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave, that formed the bedrock of Western harmony. Their preferred tuning for the lyre, as revealed by the notation tablets, was a 7-note diatonic scale, the very same do-re-mi foundation that would become the basis of ancient Greek music and 2,000 years later, almost all Western music. This was not a happy accident. It was the result of centuries of meticulous observation and experimentation, a conscious effort to organize sound into a mathematically pleasing and spiritually potent system. The instruments they crafted to bring this music to life were objects of both technical mastery and breathtaking beauty. The lyre was their quintessential instrument, and the ones found in the royal cemetery of Ur are true masterworks. These were not small, lap-sized instruments. They were great, upright sound boxes, often over a meter tall, with a booming, resonant voice. The most magnificent example is the Great Lyre of Ur, a stunning artifact decorated with a golden bull's head, its eyes made of lapis lazuli and shell. The sound box itself was a wooden chamber, expertly constructed to amplify the sound of the 11 strings that stretched from the crossbar down to the base. These strings were made from gut, carefully twisted and tuned to their specific pitches, but the Sumerians' musical palette was vast. They had a variety of harps, both angular and arched, that provided a sweeter, more intimate tone. They crafted flutes and double pipes or oloi, made from reed, wood, or even bone, capable of producing haunting, breathy melodies. And they had a full percussion section, including frame drums, tambourines, and large copper kettle drums that could provide a powerful rhythmic foundation for their processions and ceremonies. This diverse arsenal of instruments allowed them to create truly complex musical arrangements. A full Sumerian orchestra would have featured sections of strings, winds, and percussion, capable of producing a rich tapestry of sound for both secular and sacred occasions. Music was woven into the very fabric of their existence. It was performed in the temples to accompany rituals and soothe the gods, with specific hymns for specific deities. It was played in the palace during feasts and celebrations, entertaining the nobility. Lamentations were sung with musical accompaniment to mourn the passing of a king or to beg the gods for mercy during a drought. And it was undoubtedly played in the streets and homes, providing a soundtrack to daily life. Their invention of notation proves they viewed music not as a fleeting entertainment, but as a serious intellectual and spiritual discipline, an art form worthy of preservation and study. In those etched clay instructions, we find the moment music transitioned from an ephemeral experience into a permanent part of human culture, a legacy of harmony that we continue to build upon today. Yet for all the harmony of their music and the efficiency of their cedar plows, the entire edifice of Sumerian civilization rested upon a concept so fundamental we often take it for granted: trust. How could a merchant in Ur be sure that the silver he was paid for a shipment of grain was of the correct purity and weight? How could an engineer in Lagash be certain that the bricks for the new ziggurat would be identical to those used in the foundation? The answer lies in a quiet, unassuming revolution that gave the ancient world its first universal language of value and dimension. The Sumerians, in their relentless pursuit of order, invented the world's first comprehensive and standardized system of weights and measures, a technology of trust that became the invisible bedrock of their economy, their architecture, and their science. The foundation of their entire system of value was a small but precisely defined unit of weight known as the shekel. The word itself comes from the Sumerian she, meaning barleycorn, and it originally represented the weight of a specific number of those grains. This was a brilliant move, grounding their most abstract concept of value in a universally available, naturally consistent commodity. But they didn't stop with barleycorns. They carved this standard into something permanent and impossible to counterfeit: stone. Sumerian craftsmen produced exquisitely shaped weights from hard, durable stone like diorite or hematite. These were not rough lumps. They were carefully polished into elegant duck-shaped forms or simple, flattened spheres, each one precisely calibrated. The most common weight was the 1 shekel stone, but the system was built on their base 60 mathematics, so they created a full set of weights in precise multiples. 60 shekels made 1 mina, and 60 minas made 1 talent, a massive unit used for weighing enormous quantities of goods like wool or metal. A merchant would carry his own personal set of these stone weights, and a transaction would be sealed by placing the silver on one side of a simple balance scale and the certified stone weight on the other. When the beams leveled, both parties knew the exchange was mathematically fair. For measuring the physical world, they developed an equally sophisticated, if more familiar, system of linear measurement. It began, as in many cultures, with the human body. The basic unit was the shusi, or finger width, roughly equivalent to 3/4 of an inch. 30 shusi made 1 kush, or cubit, the length from a man's elbow to the tip of his middle finger, standardized to about 19.5 inches. 12 kush made 1 ninden, or rod, a length of about 6 meters that was essential for surveying fields and planning city lots. The true genius, however, was not in the units themselves, but in their ruthless standardization. This was not left to individual interpretation. The royal palace produced and distributed official measuring rods made of bronze or carved wood. These master standards were kept in the temples, and copies were sent to administrators in every city. A builder in Yorok and a surveyor in Eridu were using the exact same definition of a cubit, ensuring that architectural plans were interchangeable and that every citizen received a fair and equal plot of land when new irrigation projects opened up territory for farming. The impact of this innovation rippled through every layer of Sumerian society, creating a world of predictable fairness. In the marketplace, it eradicated the age-old problem of the dishonest scale. A farmer selling his barley could now be confident he was receiving the correct weight of silver in return. Long-distance trade, the lifeblood of their resource-poor land, became possible because a mina of silver in Sumer was the same as a mina of silver in the distant Indus Valley, creating a de facto international currency. This reliability built the trust necessary for complex contracts and investments to flourish. In construction, it allowed for the prefabrication of building materials on an industrial scale. Because every brickmaker used the same official mold, every sun-dried mud brick was virtually identical. This meant an architect could calculate exactly how many bricks were needed for a new section of the city wall, and a team of laborers could lay them with speed and precision, knowing each brick would fit perfectly with its neighbor. Perhaps most profoundly, this technology of measurement was the essential prerequisite for all scientific advancement. You cannot track the movement of a planet if you cannot accurately measure time. You cannot calculate the area of a field or the volume of a granary without standardized units of length. The Sumerians' ability to quantify their world with such consistency is what allowed their astronomers to discern the slow precession of the equinoxes and their mathematicians to solve quadratic equations. Their weights and measures were the tools that transformed the universe from a mysterious realm of gods into a knowable, mechanical system that could be described, predicted, and ultimately understood. In those carefully carved stone weights and polished bronze rods, we see the birth of empirical science itself, a silent declaration that the world could be known not through superstition but through numbers. While their musical notation captured the sound of their world and their weights and measures brought order to it, Sumerian artisans were simultaneously mastering a transformative power that literally reshaped the earth beneath their feet. In workshops across the land, they harnessed fire with a precision that would not be surpassed for millennia, turning humble clay into objects of stunning durability, beauty, and astonishing utility. This was not the simple bonfire firing of earlier cultures. This was the science of advanced, high-temperature ceramics, a technology that required a profound understanding of thermodynamics and chemistry, all achieved over 5,000 years ago. At the heart of this revolution was a piece of equipment so sophisticated it redefined what was possible: the double-chambered updraft kiln. Earlier kilns were little more than covered pits or single-chambered ovens where the fire directly licked the pottery, leading to uneven heating, smoky atmospheres, and frequent breakage. The Sumerian design was a stroke of pure engineering genius. They constructed a two-level structure, often partially sunk into the ground for insulation. The lower chamber, the firebox, was where the fuel, typically plentiful bundles of reeds or straw, was burned. Located directly above this, but separated by a perforated clay floor, was the upper firing chamber where the carefully arranged pots were placed. The key was the flow of heat. The hot gases and flames from the firebox would not simply surround the pots. They were forced to rise through the holes in the floor, washing evenly over the entire load of pottery before exiting through a flue hole at the top of the dome. This design created a much more uniform temperature throughout the kiln and crucially allowed the potter to control the atmosphere inside. This control over the kiln's atmosphere was their secret weapon. By carefully managing the amount of oxygen available during the critical final stage of firing, they could choose the very color of their ceramics. An oxygen-rich or oxidizing atmosphere would produce the familiar warm reds and oranges of terracotta as the iron impurities in the clay rusted. But if they starved the kiln of oxygen by closing the vents and adding green vegetation to smother the fire, they created a reducing atmosphere. In this smoky, oxygen-poor environment, the same iron impurities would turn a deep, sleek gray or even black, producing the elegant monochrome we're highly prized by the elite. This ability to command the very chemistry of the clay itself speaks to a level of experimental mastery that is truly staggering. The immense thermal efficiency of these kilns allowed them to consistently achieve temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees Celsius. At this threshold, something magical occurs: vitrification. The individual particles of clay begin to fuse together into a glassy, non-porous matrix. This process transforms a fragile, water-absorbent clay pot into a vessel of immense strength and durability, one that could hold liquids indefinitely without weeping or weakening. It was this vitrified strength that allowed them to create one of their most practical and overlooked inventions: ceramic plumbing. Archaeologists excavating the palaces of Ur and the temple complex at Eridu have uncovered extensive networks of terracotta pipes. These were not crude troughs, they were carefully engineered, vitrified ceramic tubes, often with flanged ends that fit snugly into one another, creating sealed conduits for draining rainwater from vast rooftops and even for managing wastewater from certain areas. This represents the world's first known urban sanitation system, a testament to applying ceramic technology to public health. Beyond the purely practical, this mastery of heat opened up a world of artistic expression. Sumerian potters were not just manufacturers, they were artists who created exquisite painted pottery. Using slips finely refined, liquid clay in different colors, they painted elaborate geometric patterns, scenes of religious ceremony, and processions of animals onto their vessels before firing. The high kiln temperatures permanently bonded these designs to the pot's surface, creating images that have survived thousands of years in the ground with their vibrancy intact. Their most ritually significant creations, however, were the elaborate libation vessels. These were often in the shape of sacred animals, bulls, rams, or lions, with the spout emerging from the chest or mouth. A priest would pour a liquid offering, perhaps beer or fine oil, into an opening on the animal's back, and it would slowly trickle out from the front in a continuous ritual stream. The complexity of these hollow cast figures, fired without exploding, demonstrates an almost intuitive understanding of wall thickness and thermal dynamics. Perhaps their most enigmatic ceramic achievement, however, was the development of the first glazes. They discovered that by sprinkling common salt into the kiln during the highest temperatures of the firing process, they could create a thin, glassy coating on the surface of the pottery. The sodium from the salt would vaporize and react with the silica in the clay, forming a natural glaze called soda glaze. Later, they began experimenting with lead-based compounds, creating brighter, more colorful glazes that would pave the way for all future ceramic finishes. This move from simply shaping clay to actively engineering its surface chemistry represents a fundamental leap in material science. Their kilns were more than ovens. They were catalytic chambers where earth, fire, and human ingenuity fused to create a new, more durable, and more beautiful world, one perfectly fired pot at a time. Yet, even with their precise weights and masterful control of fire, the Sumerians were on the verge of an intellectual leap so abstract, so fundamentally world-altering, that it would lay the hidden groundwork for every advanced calculation in human history. This was not a technology of stone or clay, but of pure thought, the revolutionary concept of zero and the place value system. While often credited to later Indian mathematicians, the seeds of this idea, the recognition of emptiness as a necessary mathematical concept, were first sown in the fertile minds of Sumerian scholars. Their base 60 system, brilliant in its divisibility, presented a unique challenge. How does one clearly write the number 361? In our system, we use the digits 3, 6, and 1, and the position of each digit tells us its value. The 3 is in the hundreds place, the 6 in the tens. The Sumerians faced the same problem, but without a symbol for zero, ambiguity could reign. A scribe would use a combination of their two cuneiform number signs, the wedge for 1 and the chevron for 10, to represent values from 1 to 59. But to write 60, they needed to indicate that the number in the 60's place was 1, and the number in the 1's place was nothing. Their ingenious, albeit initial, solution was simply to leave a blank space in the cuneiform text where a 0 should be. This empty gap was the placeholder, a visual representation of the absence of a value in that particular column. It was a 0 in practice, if not yet in name. This system of positional notation, where the value of a symbol depends on its place relative to others, was their true masterstroke. A single wedge impression didn't just mean one, its meaning was entirely contextual. In the rightmost column, it meant 1. In the next column to the left, it meant 60. In the next, it meant 3,660 times 60. THIS Chinese letter leap meant that with just two simple symbols, they could represent astronomically large numbers with perfect clarity and perform calculations that would be impossibly cumbersome in a non-positional system like Roman numerals. The power of this is almost impossible to overstate. It is the difference between trying to solve a complex physics problem with an abacus versus a modern computer. We see the profound utility of this system in their astronomical tablets. To track the slow, graceful dance of the planets across the night sky required calculating with enormous numbers and minute fractions. Their place value system made this not just possible but manageable. A planetary cycle lasting thousands of days could be neatly broken down into columns of 60 to the power of whatever, allowing for clean arithmetic. This mathematical technology was the engine behind their ability to predict lunar eclipses and map the precession of the equinoxes. You simply cannot model the cosmos with such precision using a clunky, additive number system. The implications of this innovation ripple far beyond ancient star charts. The Sumerian concept of a positional system, with its implied placeholder, is the direct ancestor of the number system we use today. When Indian mathematicians later developed the explicit symbol for 0, they were perfecting an idea that Mesopotamian scribes had been practically using for over 2 millennia. This was perhaps their most enduring gift to the world, a framework for thought that allowed humanity to graduate from simple counting to truly complex computation. It provided the essential grammar for the language of mathematics, a language that would eventually describe everything from the force of gravity to the structure of the atom. In those deliberate blank spaces left on clay tablets, we see the birthplace of a concept that would eventually allow us to conceive of nothingness, and in doing so grasp the infinite. But to truly conquer the rivers and the open sea, the Sumerians had to become master shipwrights, designing vessels that were not just simple rafts, but sophisticated machines engineered for specific tasks and treacherous waters. Their shipbuilding prowess was a testament to their deep understanding of local materials and the unforgiving principles of hydrodynamics. In the marsh-rich south, where wood was scarce, they turned to the most abundant resource available, the mighty reeds that grew along the riverbanks. They would gather vast bundles of these reeds, tying them together with tough ropes made from palm fiber to form long, cigar-shaped hulls. The true genius, however, was in their waterproofing. They coated the entire exterior of these reed boats with bitumen, a natural tar-like petroleum that seeped up from the ground in parts of Mesopotamia. This thick, black substance was heated until viscous and then applied in layers, creating a flexible, watertight seal that turned a permeable bundle of vegetation into a buoyant, seaworthy craft. These boats, known as quafar, were often bowl-shaped and incredibly stable, perfect for ferrying goods and people across the turbulent rivers. For longer voyages and heavier cargoes, however, they turned to wood. In the northern city-states closer to forested regions or through trade with Lebanon for prized cedar logs, Sumerian shipbuilders crafted proper wooden ships. These were not the massive vessels of later ages, but they were marvels of design for their time. Using bronze tools, saws, adzes, and drills, they shaped planks and joined them together with mortise and tenon joints, a technique that involved carving a protrusion on one plank that fit snugly into a cavity on another, creating a strong, flexible hull without relying solely on nails or pegs. The shape of the hull was critical. Through centuries of observation, they intuitively grasped the principles of hydrodynamics. They built boats with a pronounced keel to help them track straight and resist sideways drift, and they gave the hulls a gentle curve or rocker which made them more maneuverable. Understanding cargo distribution was another key insight. They learned to place heavy loads low and centered in the hull to lower the center of gravity and prevent capsizing, while lighter goods could be stored higher up. Their navigation techniques for open water travel were a blend of acquired skill and celestial observation. Without a magnetic compass, Sumerian mariners became expert readers of the natural world. They learned to interpret the patterns of waves and swells, understanding that a change in the rhythm could indicate a shift in wind direction or the approach of shallower water near a hidden sandbar. They observed the flight paths of birds, knowing that certain species would fly toward land at dusk. Most importantly, they navigated by the stars. While they may not have had detailed star charts for the entire Gulf, they knew the fixed positions of key northern constellations that circled the pole star. By keeping these familiar stars on a specific bearing relative to their course, they could maintain a general direction through the night. This hard-won knowledge allowed them to undertake journeys that seem astonishingly bold. They established and maintained regular trade routes that stretched from the Mediterranean coast, where they sourced silver and timber, all the way to the distant Indus Valley civilization, a voyage of over 1,500 miles of open sea and coastline. This maritime network didn't just carry goods, it carried ideas, technologies, and cultural influences, weaving together the earliest threads of global interconnection and proving that their vision extended far beyond the horizon across the endless blue highway. Even the grandest architectural vision, from a soaring ziggurat to an impregnable city wall, must begin with a single, fundamental unit. For the Sumerians, that unit was the humble mud brick, but they transformed this simplest of materials through a process of mass production and standardization that would become the literal building block of their civilization. In the sun-drenched fields on the outskirts of every major city, an industrial-scale operation was constantly underway. Workers would mix the rich, alluvial clay of the riverbanks with water and a tempering agent, usually chopped straw or sand, to prevent cracking during drying. This mixture was then packed into identical, open-topped wooden molds, creating bricks of a perfectly uniform size and shape. The most common format was the rectangular brick, but they also produced specialized curved bricks for constructing arches and vaulted ceilings. This was not casual craftsmanship. It was factory-level production, with teams of laborers working in concert to produce thousands of these standardized units daily, creating a reliable and endless supply of construction material. However, a brick dried only in the sun, known as an adobe brick, had a critical weakness: water. A heavy rain could literally melt a structure back into the mud from which it came. The Sumerian solution was to take their production process one revolutionary step further. They fired their bricks in kilns, using the same advanced, double-chambered updraft kilns they employed for ceramics. They could bake these clay blocks at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. This firing process triggered vitrification, permanently fusing the clay particles into a hard, durable, and water-resistant material. These fired bricks were exponentially more resilient and became the preferred material for any structure that needed to withstand the elements or bear immense weight. The foundations of ziggurats, the outer skins of palaces, and most importantly, the vast defensive walls that protected their cities. The mass production of these standardized, kiln-fired bricks meant that an architect could plan a massive project knowing that every single unit would fit perfectly with the next, enabling construction on a scale and with a speed that was previously unimaginable. But even the finest fired brick could be compromised by the mortar holding it together. Ordinary mud mortar would wash away, weakening the entire structure. Once again, the Sumerians turned to the natural bounty beneath their feet, pioneering the use of bitumen as a miraculous waterproofing agent. Bitumen, a naturally occurring form of petroleum that seeped up in black, viscous pools across Mesopotamia, was the ancient world's ultimate sealant. They would collect this sticky substance, heat it to make it pliable, and then use it as a thick, black mortar between their fired bricks. When it cooled, it set into a formidable, flexible, and completely waterproof bond that could withstand floods and driving rain. Its utility didn't end there. They used it to line canals and reservoirs to prevent seepage, to coat the hulls of their reed boats to make them buoyant, and even as an adhesive for inlaying precious materials into artwork. This application of bitumen was a masterstroke of practical chemistry, granting their architecture a longevity that has allowed it to partially survive for over 5,000 years. With these two technologies, standardized fired bricks and bitumen mortar, the Sumerians could finally execute their architectural ambitions on a truly monumental scale. The most immediate and vital application was the construction of colossal city walls. A city like Uruk was surrounded by a defensive barrier that was a terror to behold, a continuous loop of towering brickwork, described in the Epic of Gilgamesh as having foundations made of fired brick and the brilliant copper on its top. These walls were not simple partitions. They were complex engineering projects with massive, projecting towers that allowed defenders to fire on attackers from multiple angles, reinforced gates with heavy wooden doors sheathed in metal, and ramparts wide enough for soldiers to patrol. The psychological and military security provided by these walls allowed urban populations to swell into the tens of thousands, creating the dense, vibrant heart of Sumerian civilization. Yet their ultimate expression of construction mastery was not in defense, but in devotion. The great temple complexes and ziggurats, these structures were built on platforms of fired brick to raise them above the floodplain, and their cores were made of millions of sun-dried bricks. But the visible, imposing exterior was a perfect skin of kiln-fired bricks, laid with bitumen mortar and often finished with a dazzling decorative cladding. They developed intricate patterns using bricks glazed in brilliant colors: lapis blue, cobalt, and white. Or they used specially molded bricks that created textured reliefs of animals, mythological creatures, and geometric patterns. The best example is the famed Ishtar Gate of Babylon, a later evolution of this Sumerian technique, which was entirely covered in glazed bricks forming images of dragons and bulls. This fusion of raw industrial might and exquisite artistic sensitivity is what defines their architectural legacy. They understood that a building should be both profoundly strong and spiritually uplifting, a testament to a people who could not only organize the labor of thousands to move mountains of earth and clay, but who also never lost sight of the beauty and divine order that those mountains were meant to represent. And while their ships carried goods across the known world and their walls protected bustling cities, a quieter revolution was unfolding within the administrative offices of the temples and palaces, one that would provide the essential framework for all this economic complexity. The Sumerians faced a problem of scale. How do you manage the vast, flowing wealth of history's first civilization? How do you track the thousands of daily transactions, the barley paid to workers, the wool received from shepherds, the silver owed by merchants? Their solution was a technology of information so elegant and sophisticated that its core principles are still used by every major corporation and government on Earth today. They invented systematic accounting, transforming the chaos of commerce into a meticulously ordered system of record. This system began not with writing but with symbolism. Before the first cuneiform wedge was ever pressed into clay, Sumerian accountants used small, geometric clay tokens. Each token was a three-dimensional symbol. A cone might represent a small measure of grain, a sphere a larger quantity, a cylinder a jar of oil, and a tetrahedron a day of labor. To record a transaction, an accountant would take a collection of tokens representing the goods involved and seal them inside a hollow, fist-sized clay ball called a bulla. He would then roll his personal cylinder seal across the surface of the wet clay ball, marking it as official and tamper-proof. The beauty of this system was its security and verifiability. If a dispute arose later, say, a shepherd claimed he had delivered 50 sheep, the bulla could be broken open. The tokens inside would provide an incontrovertible record of the original agreement, a permanent physical ledger locked in clay. The true evolutionary leap, however, came when an anonymous clerk had a brilliant idea. Instead of waiting to break the bulla to see what was inside, why not impress the tokens onto the outside of the clay ball while it was still soft? This way, you could see the transaction at a glance without destroying the record. They began pressing the tokens into the surface of the bulla before sealing it, creating a visible inventory. Then came the final, monumental insight. If the impressions tell the story, why make the tokens at all? Scribes began using a stylus to mimic the shapes of the tokens by pressing the corner of a reed into a flat clay tablet, creating a two-dimensional representation. The token for grain wasn't pressed into the clay. A wedge was used to draw a grain symbol. This was the moment accounting gave birth to writing. Cuneiform script, humanity's first written language, evolved directly from the need to keep better books. With the power of writing at their disposal, Sumerian accountants developed systems of breathtaking complexity. They created standardized forms and table layouts with columns for dates, descriptions of goods, quantities, names of transacting parties, and official seals. They maintained vast archives or tablet collections that functioned as the state's central database, with records meticulously organized and retrievable for audits years or even decades later. Their inventory management was particularly advanced. Temple warehouses, which held the surplus that fed the entire society, used a perpetual inventory system. Incoming shipments were recorded on one set of tablets, disbursements to workers or for trade on another. Regular physical stocktakes were conducted, and the clay records were reconciled against the actual goods on hand, a process that would be instantly familiar to any modern warehouse manager. Most astonishingly, there is compelling evidence they pioneered a primitive form of double-entry bookkeeping, a concept not formally recognized again until the Italian Renaissance merchants of the 14th century. While not the fully developed system of debits and credits seen today, Sumerian accounts show a clear understanding of dual-sided recording. A single transaction would be recorded in two separate accounts to maintain balance. For instance, the receipt of 500 jars of oil into a temple warehouse would be logged as an increase in the oil assets account and simultaneously as a decrease in the accounts payable owed to the specific merchant who supplied it. This ensured that the total resources of the institution always balanced with its obligations and equity, providing a complete and accurate picture of financial health. This wasn't just record keeping, it was a conceptual framework for understanding value in motion, a way to see the entire economy as an interconnected system of flows and stocks. This accounting technology became the central nervous system of the Sumerian state. It enabled the precise calculation and collection of taxes, which were often paid in kind with goods like barley, wool, or silver. It allowed for the meticulous planning of massive projects, determining exactly how many man-days of labor and how many bricks were needed to build a canal or a ziggurat. It brought enforceability to contracts as a written record of a loan's terms. The principal, the interest rate, the repayment date could be held by both parties and presented to a court if necessary. This created the trust required for a credit economy to flourish, where capital could be allocated and invested for future gain. The humble clay tablet, etched with the mundane details of bushels and shekels, was the unsung hero of Sumerian civilization. It was the tool that allowed them to see their world not as a series of disconnected events, but as a measurable, manageable, and predictable system, laying the administrative groundwork for every empire and every economy that would follow. But to truly appreciate the depth of their chemical knowledge, we must move beyond the practical and into the realm of the truly enigmatic. It appears the Sumerians were not just users of chemical reactions. They were pioneering experimenters, engaging in processes that seemed to prefigure one of the most transformative technologies in history, distillation. While we have no direct archaeological evidence of a Sumerian alembic still, we do have compelling written clues. Cuneiform tablets from the city of Nippur contain references to a process for purifying or concentrating something referred to as the essence or spirit of various materials. The terminology used is incredibly suggestive, describing a setup involving a heated pot, a cooled lid, and the collection of a condensed liquid that drips down. This process, known to later alchemists as destillatio, involves heating a liquid to create vapor and then cooling that vapor to separate it from impurities or to concentrate its alcoholic or aromatic components. It is entirely plausible that Sumerian artisans, in their relentless pursuit of purer perfumes, medicinal tinctures, or even stronger alcoholic spirits, had stumbled upon the fundamental principle of distillation. They may have used simple apparatus made of clay and reed tubes to capture the volatile spirit of a substance, a groundbreaking conceptual leap that viewed matter as something that could be broken down and purified into its constituent parts through the application of controlled heat. This experimental spirit extended to their mastery of acids and alkalis, substances they manipulated with a surprising degree of sophistication. Their primary alkali was a substance they called netta, which was likely a naturally occurring deposit of soda ash or a lye made by leaching water through the ashes of certain salt-loving plants. They used this powerful alkaline solution as a remarkably effective cleaning agent for washing wool and textiles before dyeing, as it would saponify and strip away the natural greases in the fiber. They also used it in a crude form of soap making, mixing fats with these alkaline ashes to create a substance that could lift dirt and oil. On the other side of the pH scale, they harnessed the power of acids, though in a more limited way. The primary acid in their arsenal was vinegar, produced through the further fermentation of their beer or date wine. They recognized its properties as a mild disinfectant and used it in pickling to preserve vegetables. Perhaps most intriguingly, they may have used weak acidic solutions like soured wine in the process of separating metals from their ores or in cleaning metal surfaces before working them, demonstrating a practical, if not theoretical, grasp of basic chemical reactivity. Their palette of chemical agents was vast and deliberately sourced. They utilized various copper salts like malachite and azurite, not just as pigments for eye paint, but as coloring agents in their glass and ceramic glazes, where the copper would fire to a brilliant turquoise or green. They mined and processed sulfur, a bright yellow mineral that burns with a strange blue flame and produces choking fumes. While they certainly didn't understand its atomic properties, they employed it practically as a fumigant to purify sacred spaces and possibly to treat mildew in stored grain. They also had access to salts of antimony, which they ground into a fine powder known as kohl and used as a prominent eyeliner. This was far more than mere cosmetics. The kohl would have helped reduce the sun's glare on the bright Mesopotamian plains, acting as an ancient form of sunscreen. Furthermore, the antimony sulfide had mild antiseptic properties, helping to protect against common eye infections in the dusty environment. Every application was a solution to a problem, a hard-won piece of knowledge gained through generations of observation and trial and error. This is the central mystery of Sumerian chemistry. How did they achieve so much without any of the theoretical frameworks we take for granted? They had no concept of the periodic table, no understanding of molecules or atomic bonds. Their knowledge was not derived from theory, but from a deeply empirical and observational tradition, passed down through generations of artisan guilds and priestly scholars. Theirs was a science of effect, not cause. They knew that adding a specific plant ash to a boiling pot of fat created a substance that cleaned. They knew that heating a particular blue stone in a crucible with charcoal would yield a shiny red metal. They knew that a certain yellow mineral, when burned, drove away insects and evil spirits. Their laboratory was the workshop and the temple, and their methodology was one of meticulous repetition and careful recording of results on clay tablets. They were master pattern recognizers, connecting thousands of cause and effect observations into a reliable, reproducible technology. This practical mastery, divorced from abstract theory, allowed them to build a material world of stunning complexity, laying the chemical foundations upon which all subsequent ancient civilizations would build, their silent experiments echoing through millennia in the vibrant colors of a glass bead, the strength of a cured hide, and the enduring mystery of a process that sought to capture the very spirit of matter itself. While their accounting systems mastered the flow of time and resources, the Sumerians were also developing a revolutionary way to visualize and command the space around them. In the administrative heart of a city like Nippur, a scribe might unroll a clay tablet unlike any other, not a list of goods or a celestial omen, but a diagram of the world itself. These were not crude sketches, they were the world's first known maps, sophisticated tools of cartography that demonstrate a conceptual leap in how humanity understood its place in the physical landscape. The most famous example, the Nippur map, is a stunning artifact inscribed on a small clay tablet. At first glance, it seems simple, but a closer look reveals a remarkably advanced spatial intelligence. The map depicts the city of Nippur itself, showing its grand temple complex at the center, the mighty Euphrates River flowing past its walls, and a connecting canal that brought life-giving water into the city. Surrounding this are carefully drawn rectangles, each representing a parcel of agricultural land or perhaps a neighboring town. What makes this so revolutionary is its use of a consistent scale and a symbolic language. The mapmaker wasn't just drawing things as he remembered them. He was deliberately reducing the sprawling, chaotic reality of the world into a manageable, two-dimensional plan. He chose which features were important enough to include the river, the canal, the temple, the fields, and which to omit, creating a focused document for a specific purpose. The orientation is also deliberate, though not aligned to our modern north. It was likely oriented to the flow of the river or the path of the sun, the two most important directional markers in their world. This technology of spatial representation was born from a very practical, administrative need, the fair and efficient distribution of land. Following the annual flood of the Euphrates, the landscape could be dramatically altered. Property boundaries marked by simple stones could be washed away, leading to endless disputes between farmers. A map, however, provided an indisputable permanent record. Surveyors, using their standardized units of measurement like the rod and the cubit, would carefully measure these newly defined plots of land. A scribe would then translate these measurements into a scaled diagram on a clay tablet. These maps were often included as part of legal documents recording the sale or inheritance of property, providing a visual guarantee of exactly what was being traded. This eliminated ambiguity and created a stable, reliable system of land ownership that was essential for a society whose wealth was rooted in agriculture. The map became a tool of justice, a way to bring order to the fertile chaos of the floodplain. Beyond settling disputes between neighbors, this cartographic skill was fundamental to the largest civil engineering projects of the ancient world, the planning and maintenance of their vast irrigation networks. The complexity of their canal systems, with main arteries, secondary channels, and feeder ditches, was too immense to manage from memory alone. Mapmakers would create detailed plans showing the entire web of waterways, the sluice gates that controlled the flow, and the fields each channel served. This allowed engineers to plan new extensions, calculate water distribution quotas for different districts, and organize the massive, ongoing dredging operations needed to keep the canals from silting up. A map could show at a glance how a change in one part of the system would affect everything downstream, enabling a level of systemic management that was utterly unprecedented. These were not just maps, they were the hydraulic blueprints for civilization itself. The question that naturally arises from such sophisticated spatial understanding is whether it extended beyond the familiar banks of the Euphrates. Did the Sumerians create maps for navigation? While no surviving chart of the Persian Gulf has been found, their established maritime trade routes stretching from Dilmun to the Indus Valley make it incredibly likely. The skills needed for accurate map-making, precise measurement, an understanding of scale, and the ability to represent a three-dimensional journey in 2 dimensions are the same skills required for piloting a ship across open water. It is plausible that sailor cartographers created rudimentary portolan charts, mapping coastlines, noting landmarks, and marking safe anchorages on wax-covered wooden boards or treated leather scrolls, materials that would have perished over the millennia. These maps would have been priceless state secrets, closely guarded by the merchant houses and temples that funded these risky but immensely profitable voyages, their knowledge passed down orally from captain to pilot. Whether used to divide a farmer's field or guide a ship through treacherous waters, the Sumerian map was ultimately a technology of control and connection, a powerful abstraction that allowed them to see the world not as an overwhelming mystery, but as a system that could be measured, managed, and mastered. And now we arrive at perhaps the most controversial and tantalizing of all Sumerian mysteries, a puzzle that seems to leapfrog millennia of scientific progress and land squarely in the realm of the seemingly impossible. While they mastered the visible world of agriculture and architecture, could the Sumerians have also harnessed a force that would not be formally discovered for another 4,000 years? We are talking, of course, about electricity. The primary evidence for this staggering possibility is a strange and humble object unearthed in 1936 just outside Baghdad in the village of Kujat Rabu. While the site was from the later Parthian period, around 2,000 years ago, many researchers believe the technology itself, like so many others, may have been a surviving relic of a much older Mesopotamian tradition, one that could trace its origins back to the innovative minds of Sumer. The artifact itself is deceptively simple. It consists of a 13-centimeter tall clay jar, pale yellow in color, of a style common to the region. Inside this jar was a carefully rolled copper sheet, formed into a cylinder about 10 centimeters long and 2.5 centimeters in diameter. This cylinder was soldered shut with a lead tin alloy, a technique requiring considerable metallurgical skill. Suspended inside this copper cylinder, but not touching it, was an iron rod. The top of the jar was sealed with an asphalt plug, which also acted as an insulator, holding the iron rod perfectly in place within the copper cylinder. The bottom of the copper cylinder was capped with a copper disc, which was also sealed to the jar with more asphalt. The entire device showed clear signs of corrosion, and it was found alongside several other similar jars and a number of iron and copper rods in a tomb, suggesting it was considered an important grave good. When German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig first examined the find, he was struck by its uncanny resemblance to a galvanic cell, the basic component of an electric battery. The theory is startlingly straightforward. If this jar were filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar, lemon juice, or fermented grape juice, all substances readily available to the ancient Mesopotamians, a chemical reaction would occur. The acidic electrolyte would interact with the two different metals, causing the iron rod to corrode and release electrons. The copper cylinder would then accept these electrons. This movement of electrons from the iron anode to the copper cathode is by definition an electric current. Experimental reconstructions have consistently proven that a replica of the Baghdad Battery, when filled with an electrolyte like grape juice, can generate a low-level voltage between 0.8 and 2 volts. While a single cell produces only a mild tingle, connecting several of these jars together in a series, as modern experimenters have done, can create a cumulative voltage strong enough to produce a noticeable shock or even to power a small electric motor. This leads to the inevitable and profound question: if this was indeed a primitive battery, what on earth did they use it for? One of the most compelling theories involves not grand illumination but delicate artistry, electroplating. The Sumerians and their cultural successors were master metalsmiths who produced exquisite objects, often gilding silver with a microscopically thin layer of gold or coating base metals with precious silver. The conventional explanation is that they used mercury to create an amalgam, a dangerous and complex process. However, electroplating provides a far simpler and more elegant method. A Sumerian artisan could have placed a small statue, say a silver figurine, into a solution of gold salts. By connecting that figurine to the copper cathode of one of these batteries and then suspending a piece of gold connected to the iron anode, the electric current would slowly draw gold particles from the solution and deposit them evenly onto the statue's surface, creating a perfect, durable, and beautiful gilding. This process would explain the incredible precision of some ancient metalwork that is otherwise difficult to account for. Other theories venture into the realm of the mystical and medical. A low-level electric current applied to the body can produce a strange tingling sensation, a feeling of warmth, or even mild muscle contractions. In the hands of a knowledgeable priest or healer, such a device could have been presented as a powerful tool of divine magic. A worshipper touching the terminals might believe they were feeling the palpable presence of a god, a jolt of spiritual energy that confirmed their faith. In a medical context, while its efficacy is dubious, the application of a small electric charge could have been used in an attempt to treat pain or stimulate muscles, a primitive form of electrotherapy lost to time. The gentle current could also have been used for a more mundane but equally magical purpose, to cause a small statue wrapped with gold leaf to seemingly vibrate or shimmer when touched, creating an awe-inspiring spectacle within a dark temple chamber. Skeptics, of course, offer alternative explanations. They posit that the jars were simply secure storage containers for sacred scrolls made of papyrus or parchment, with the iron rod being the core around which the scroll was wrapped and the copper cylinder acting as a protective case. The asphalt seal would have kept out moisture and insects, preserving the texts inside. However, this theory fails to explain why such elaborate and expensive metal components would be necessary for simple scroll storage when sealed clay tubes would have sufficed, or why the iron rod shows evidence of acidic corrosion, which is consistent with an electrochemical reaction. The truth is, we may never know for certain. the Baghdad Battery remains an enigmatic outlier, a single data point in the archaeological record that challenges our linear narrative of technological progress. Whether it was a one-off experiment, a tool for plating metal, a device for religious theater, or simply a unique storage vessel, its very existence forces us to reconsider the limits of ancient innovation. It stands as a haunting reminder that the Sumerians may have possessed pockets of knowledge so advanced, so specific, that they flickered brilliantly for a moment in time before being swallowed by the sands, leaving behind only a silent clay jar and a mystery that continues to spark our imagination. And so we reach the end of our journey through the 30 enigmatic technologies of the Sumerians, a civilization that emerges from the mists of time not as a primitive beginning, but as a dazzling, fully formed sunrise of human ingenuity. From the humble, world-changing plow that fed their cities to the soaring ziggurats that touched their heavens, from the first written word on a clay tablet to the precise mathematical calculations that mapped the cosmos, their innovations were not isolated sparks but a constellation of brilliance that lit the way for all who followed. They gave us the wheel, the sail, the arch, and the law. They mastered time with their calendar, medicine with their pharmacopoeia, and economics with their standardized weights and advanced accounting. They were, in the most literal sense, the founders of the modern world, the architects of civilization itself. This incredible concentration of foundational inventions, all emerging from a single culture over a relatively short span of centuries, presents us with one of history's most profound and tantalizing mysteries. How did one society, seemingly out of nowhere, manage to invent the very blueprint for urban life, science, and commerce? The mainstream academic view offers a compelling narrative of gradual, internal development, a perfect storm of environmental factors like the fertile land between two rivers, meeting human necessity and allowing for a slow, cumulative build-up of knowledge over generations. In this view, the Sumerians were simply brilliant, pragmatic problem solvers, and their innovations were the logical outcome of their unique circumstances. Yet the sheer breadth and advanced nature of their knowledge has fueled alternative theories for decades. Could there be a lost chapter in human history? Some researchers point to the Sumerians' own accounts, which speak of wise beings like the amphibious Apkallu sages, who were said to have emerged from the sea to give humanity the gifts of civilization. Others look to their astronomical precision, their advanced understanding of precession, and technologies like the potential Baghdad Battery and wonder if they might have been the beneficiaries of knowledge from a now-vanished precursor culture, or even, as more speculative theories suggest, some form of external influence that has been lost to time. Their knowledge appears in the archaeological record, almost fully formed, leaving us to wonder if the Sumerian genius was one of brilliant invention, or perhaps one of spectacular preservation and refinement of a much older legacy. The truth is, we may never know for certain. The sands of Mesopotamia have yielded countless tablets and artifacts, but they guard their deepest secrets closely. This mystery is what makes the study of ancient history so endlessly fascinating. It is a grand puzzle where pieces are always missing, inviting us to question, to speculate, and to wonder. The story of the Sumerians challenges our assumptions about linear progress and forces us to reconsider the capabilities of our ancient ancestors. They stand as a powerful reminder that the past is not a simple story, but a complex, mysterious, and deeply intriguing landscape. What do you think? Were the Sumerians unparalleled geniuses who built civilization from the ground up through sheer ingenuity? Or does the evidence point to a more mysterious origin for their incredible knowledge? I would love to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's continue the investigation together. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the mysteries of the ancient world, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next historical